Imagine a post-apocalyptic world where everything is destroyed and no one really knows how things got to this point, since everyone who lives in this world is a survivor. The search for food and supplies is painful, where groups of homeless people keep growing and danger increases, as a single piece of bread could cost one's life. Amidst all this, there are those who can use and manipulate magic, though secretly, as such a resource is incredibly valuable. Our protagonist is in the middle of it all. He's an orphan child who doesn't know much about his past, but whose biggest concerns lie in the future, because he lives on the margins of society, waiting for an opportunity for things to get better, both for himself and for those he cares about. Our story begins in the midst of a ruined landscape. A group of children tries to protect themselves until they see a golem approaching, and one of the boys tries to bargain with the golem, offering a flashlight in exchange for food. This is the golem from Sector 50. Nobody knows where it came from or what its purpose is. What matters is that the creature accepts to trade junk for gifts. After the golem emits a beam of light from its eyes, it turns around and walks away. As we can see, the creature doesn't always exchange for food, so the boy gets upset, claiming that the golem did the same thing as the day before. While some get angry over the situation, another boy remains calm and withdrawn. He is the protagonist and then steps out of his position, heading toward the golem, believing that what was offered wasn't enough. He offers everything he has in his bag. The golem then looks at the items and accepts them as a trade, devouring everything the boy gave, which surprises the others since apparently the golem's hunger has increased. Either way, it rewards the boy with food. Not quite understanding, the others feel a bit envious. They haven't eaten in 3 days because they couldn't find many trade items, so they wonder how the ghost from Street 17 got so many things. As for the boy known as Ghost, he heads to Sector 50 on Street 17. He kind of lies there, and upon arriving, he realizes he's being watched. Not only that, but he knows he's being followed by 7 different people grouped together. Soon he tells them to reveal themselves and warns them not to keep following him. The group then reveals itself, and their leader compliments the boy's perception, calling him Ray. He also says he was following him with good intentions, clearly being sarcastic. Ray calls the pushy boy Ron, and claims that he has warned him before about these approaches. So the protagonist says that if the leader doesn't get his group out of his way, he'll make sure none of them ever walk again. However, Ron says that this time won't be like the last, since now they outnumber him. He then claims that if Ray leaves the bag on the ground, they'll let him go. Showing no fear, the protagonist calls him a liar, saying Ron has no intention of letting him go in peace. He also mentions there's a saying among the kids there: a ghost lives on Street 17. A white ghost who walks silently and expressionlessly. Therefore, you must never look into the ghost's eyes, or you'll be caught in your lies. Furious, Ron says he'll make sure Ray never says things like that again. He attacks, but the protagonist dodges easily. The pushy boy loses balance, falling straight to the ground. But before that, Ray grabs him by the shirt, then lands a solid blow on Ron. The pushy boy screams in pain, and his gang gets worried. They're angry that their leader was attacked, and they try to strike back, rushing at Ray as a group. One of them even uses a blade, but just like before, the protagonist dodges the attack. Not only that, but he uses the moment to strike them too. As a result, one of them even starts bleeding from the nose after being hit. Ray continues, targeting the others. His cold and shadowy gaze reveals his lack of empathy, and his opponents feel firsthand the pain of facing someone stronger. Ray says bringing more people to fight him won't make any difference. In turn, Ron calls him a monster, and begs him not to come any closer. The protagonist stops in front of the bully, and simply says he warned him that if he tried to fight him, he'd never walk again. Trying to defend himself, Ron hides a knife behind his back, then pulls it on Ray, telling him not to even try to get closer. The protagonist thinks about how he's always been called a ghost, not a monster. He concludes that such treatment suits him. He remembers that when he was 10 years old, he discovered that he was a boy different from the others, because when he got hurt, he didn't cry in pain like the other children. Not only that, but he also didn't feel uncontrollable anger like some. Much less did he feel sadness when someone died. Ray didn't show emotions like the people around him. Therefore, he was treated differently from them. Upon realizing that he couldn't feel what others called emotions, he wondered if something was wrong with him, because he wanted to be like everyone else. And he tried to imagine if he would ever learn what those emotions really were. Even now, 6 years later, he still can't feel them, but he can read others' emotions, and so he tells Ron that not using blades is an implicit rule here. He also says that from the beginning, the opponent had that knife with the intent to use it. Ron says he got it from the trash can earlier, but Ray calls him a liar once again. He believes he can see the truth by looking at the color of the boy's blood vessels inside his body. He can see a world others can't. Every person has a small vessel inside them, and when they feel emotions, certain colors of mana appear. Anger, hatred, and love result in red mana. Ridicule and apathy result in blue mana. Joy and excitement result in yellow mana. And there are countless other colors. The protagonist's world is exploding with colors. Meanwhile, Ron says that if Ray tries anything against him, he'll get hurt. Ray sees a dark mana emanating from Ron and realizes that he feels intense fear. The boy who once was full of courage is now trembling in fear and backs away as much as he can, though still showing no remorse. Ray says that a liar like him deserves proper punishment. After taking care of that inconvenient matter, the protagonist moves on to what really matters. Upon arriving at his tent, he finds Pale, the leader of the children under the overpass. The children hug the protagonist, calling him brother, but the leader tells them not to do that because Ray doesn't like it. Regardless, Pale gets ready to feed everyone. But upon seeing the little food they have, he wonders if they can really split that among 7 people. But Ray didn't come back empty-handed. He reveals that his bag is full of food. Upon seeing that, the children are very happy because that's more than they usually have. Ray thinks that since the golem only takes magical items with residual mana, it won't take anything from him if it can't see the mana in objects. That's why he managed to get so much food, and Pale thanks him because now they can have a decent meal. He then distributes the food among the children, and they thank him. In turn, Ray steps out of the tent, thinking that there's never enough food for everyone, although Pale said otherwise. He wonders if he'll have to go to the warehouse, because he sees it as his duty to support this group, since he owes them his life. A flashback shows that 1 year ago, Ray was lying in the snow, and the group led by Pale found him. They rescued him and didn't let Ray die. If they hadn't done that, the cold would have taken care of ending the protagonist, so he feels indebted to these people, since he always pays for what he receives, whether it's favors or revenge. Then Pale calls out to him, saying they have enough to share with Ray, but the protagonist claims he isn't hungry, though Pale says the sound of Ray's stomach says otherwise, so he decides to share a granola bar with him. Meanwhile, Pale says it's raining and the rainwater is black. Ray thinks that's because the mages used too much magic. Apparently, the mages live in sectors with fewer inhabitants. Pale has a theory that the food golem is a mage, but Ray believes the creature is simply a machine. But that doesn't convince Pale, since he's sure it's magic that powers the golem. Thinking it over, Ray agrees with Pale, because when the golem moves, it draws mana around it into its core. Then it mixes and is expelled as a black gas. Still, he can't stop thinking that there might be a connection between the black rain and the black gas. Of course, right now, what matters most is that he needs to deal with something else. Pale says it's dangerous to go out in this rain, plus the river could overflow. But that doesn't stop the protagonist, and Pale realizes his words can't convince him. When it rains, everyone goes inside to avoid it, but the protagonist has a mission. Even knowing that a single drop of rain could make him sick, he continues on his path because he has something to do. Ray knows how to protect himself from the rain, which makes his task easier. Shortly after, he arrives at the ration warehouse owned by Hector the Limp. Inside, a few men are playing cards, and while they're distracted, Ray quickly slips through the bars and heads toward a secret passage. He's thankful the place has such poor security. However, once inside, he senses several different types of mana. Ray draws specific mana colors and mixes them according to the correct formula. From that, he's able to conjure fire and uses the element to his advantage. Even though Ray doesn't know the exact principles, he can use this method quite well. Still, controlling red mana seems harder for some reason, but he wonders if, by fully sensing the emotions tied to it, he'll be able to create an even greater fire. In the middle of his search, a knife is thrown at him, barely grazing the protagonist. The owner of the knife says that rats are trying to steal again. Ray then realizes the enemies had been hiding from the start. The enemy says that even though the rat is fast, he'll still catch him. Meanwhile, Ray notices there are 3 enemies and they already know his position. He hadn't expected them to have night vision equipment. Either way, he's now become the prey. Taking advantage of that, the enemies throw knives. Now Ray will have to figure out how to escape. He uses his speed to dodge, a speed that stuns the enemies, making them realize they're not dealing with an ordinary boy. The protagonist not only uses speed, but also strength to strike back. Seeing this, the others even insult the boy, but that only makes Ray more motivated, because he sees the hatred in the enemies, and uses it to his advantage. When looking at the enemies, Ray can read the mana flowing through their bloodstream. This becomes useful, as it allows Ray to predict the enemy's next moves. This way, he's always one step ahead of them, not giving the enemy even a chance to react. The protagonist's actions seem impossible to those watching, but to Ray, it's nothing more than the manifestation of his abilities. He takes the chance to strike the enemies with force, specifically to knock them out, and thus finish what he started. But before he can return to the crates, a new enemy appears. However, it's not just some stranger. It's actually the executive of the company, named Humphrey. The enemy realizes that the 3 brothers retreated, but failed to deal with a single intruder. Humphrey doesn't like knowing that 3 of his men couldn't handle one little rat. Ray knows from rumors that Humphrey is known for being quite intimidating, so he concludes it's best to get out of there as soon as possible. But to do that, he needs to get past the big guy. Yet when he tries to strike the enemy, Ray realizes he's tougher than he looks. He ends up face to face with Humphrey and nearly gets caught by him. The protagonist notices that his opponent is quite fast, something that Humphrey also notices about Ray. In any case, the protagonist realizes he's facing an opponent above the rest. Humphrey doesn't want to waste time and goes on the attack. With that, Ray notices that his opponent's instincts are sharp too, making Ray think it won't be easy to defeat him. Even so, he has to keep going, and while dodging the enemy's strikes, he takes the chance to analyze him. After spotting what could be a weak point, Ray aims straight for the enemy's chest, and after preparing a fire-enhanced strike, he hits Humphrey's center. That wasn't enough to defeat him, because Ray only used that skill as a distraction. Afterward, the overseer ordered everyone to search the property. In turn, Ray tries to sneak past them, and needs to quickly find a way out, until the men are called to the entrance of the warehouse, which made things much easier for the protagonist. He had looted the infamous warehouse of the Hector group. He now knows they'll kill him if they catch him. Ray isn't afraid to die, but if he leaves this world, the children who depend on him won't last long, and he won't be able to pay off his debt. In the middle of these thoughts, a guard sees him running from the place. The protagonist got distracted and ended up being spotted. Now he quickens his pace to escape from the men once again, but ends up facing a dead-end alley. The pursuers have cornered him, despite the boy's speed, and now they want revenge for what happened. For his part, Ray doesn't see Humphrey among them, so he knows he won't have any trouble defeating them. One of the men charges toward him, but Ray easily dodges the attack, taking the opportunity to counter with a right hook. That provokes some anger in them, but Ray keeps defending himself, which surprises the men since he's pretty strong for a street kid. Ray doesn't fall for their taunts, and focuses only on defeating them as quickly as possible. However, after taking down the two men, new pursuers approach, having heard the sound of the fight. Ray realizes this will never end, so he thinks of a new strategy. He hides inside a trash can to stay out of the pursuer's sight. Inside, he hears the footsteps of those chasing him, and concludes that hiding there might have been a good idea. However, he'll have to spend the night there, because if someone follows him to the bridge, the children could be in danger. From inside the trash can, he notices the rain outside has stopped, and so he manages to fall asleep. The next day, the sun rises behind a cloudy sky. Even so, a ray of light hits Ray's face and wakes him up. He decides to get out of the trash, thinking it should be safer now. But as soon as he steps out, one of the men finds him and says it was a good idea to come back there. The protagonist notices that this man is extremely furious based on the color of his mana, but Ray still hasn't fully recovered from the night before. Either way, the enemy sees that the boy also has a blade, but says that won't help him, as he claims he's going to kill him right there. Ray, however, manages to dodge and nearly strikes the enemy from behind. The man, however, is also fast, and therefore manages to counterattack. In the middle of this, Ray loses his balance, becoming completely vulnerable to a fatal blow. The protagonist definitely wasn't expecting this. That moment allowed him to see the enemy's blade up close. But this is not his end. Ray managed to escape that situation, which was far from pleasant for the enemy. An armed man appeared just in time to help the protagonist, and said that was pretty dangerous. After doing what needed to be done, he decides to smoke a cigarette. The man is the boss of Street 17, known as Niles with black hair, and upon finding Ray, asks what's with all the mess this early. He and Ray know each other, and Niles asks if someone called for the boy. The protagonist just says that Niles doesn't usually wake up this early. Niles agrees and says it happened because he heard that Hector's men were looking for a thief. Then he sees that it was indeed Ray who raided the warehouse and says he's good at what he does. Ray thanks him, but Niles says that wasn't a compliment. With that, the protagonist thinks that people like Niles are hard to deal with. In the world, there are people like him, whose emotions are so dull that their vessel never truly fills up. Niles says Ray is going to end up dead at this rate, and tells him to stay away from certain people, but Ray says that if he doesn't, he'll starve. Either way, Niles promises to reward him for the help, but Ray says he pulled him out of the river because he thought he was a supply, not because he intended to help. Still, Niles claims he survived thanks to Ray, and the protagonist says the guy already paid him for that. A year ago, by chance, Ray pulled Niles from the river. Apparently, he was an executive from Sector 46, but had been betrayed. The protagonist doesn't think that's a lie. The combat lessons he gave as a reward were well structured. Ray then remembers something Niles said before, about him joining an organization. The protagonist says he will join Niles' organization. He thinks that by doing this, the children will be safe. Niles, in turn, walks a bit, grabs a cigarette to smoke, and asks if Ray can use magic. The protagonist questions why he brought up magic. For Niles, that's the confirmation he needed, since he once saw Ray light a fire without a lighter and thought it was his imagination. He says he asked a few things to a mage from his previous organization, that there's mana in the air, which is used for magic, and that only a handful of people can detect and use mana. Ray asks what he knows about the colors. Niles says he doesn't know anything about that. Ray suspects Niles is hiding what he knows and questions him. Annoyed, Niles tries to strike the boy. After dodging, the protagonist asks if he's going to answer his question. Niles says nothing, so Ray asks why he's suddenly rejecting him. The young man says that all sectors lie along the Elton River and that Ray just needs to head upstream to reach the others. This way, he could escape the slums and find a better life. He adds that it would be a huge waste for a child with such skills to die there. He asks if Ray has ever thought about leaving Sector 50, saying he might even arrange a car for that. He also tells him not to worry about the children, as he's thinking about opening an orphanage nearby. With that, he plans to get orphans like Ray off the streets. The protagonist notices that Niles' colors are faint, so he doesn't know if he's telling the truth, but he knows the young man has always kept his word. By the way, he tells Niles to be careful, because Hector seems to be preparing for war. When he was at the warehouse, he saw some trucks being prepped to transport weapons. However, without showing surprise, Niles says he already knew that information. With that, Ray now realizes it makes sense, since using live ammunition in any conflict is a definitive declaration of war. Ray says that people in the shops will suffer if Niles loses the war, and he used to think the protection fees from his organization were reasonable. Niles replies that it only seems that way because there are far worse people out there, and besides, he doesn't like being treated like an old man. After all, he's not even married. Still, the boy tells him he looks old, which really irritates him. Anyway, one of Niles' employees shows up and says they have to go. Niles says that area is going to become a war zone, so Ray should find another hideout if he can. He also hands the boy an item. Ray doesn't know what it is, so Niles tells him it's for ear hygiene, something he'll need. That way, Ray watches as Niles walks away. Later on, in the center of Street 17, Ray returns and finds a boy with an elderly lady. The child is happy to see him, since Ray had been gone for 2 days, but he asks why he's all beat up. The younger boy quickly realizes Ray was in trouble. The protagonist reassures him. He looks into the boy's inner self and finds his aura fascinating at that moment, because the fact that one person can emit so many feelings surprises him. Either way, he gives the boy the food he got from the warehouse and tells him to let Pale know he'll be back soon. After the child leaves, Ray asks Viola, the elderly lady, if she told Josephine anything. Viola is a blind old woman who loves telling stories. She says she only talked to Josephine about rainbows. The protagonist tells her not to say such things to the children because he believes they won't get used to life on the streets if they grow attached to those fantasies. However, Viola asks who else is going to feed the fantasies if not the children. Ray sees that she has purple mana, something he's never seen in anyone else besides her, and wonders what emotion that represents. He tells Viola she should move to another street since a war might break out there soon. The old lady, however, just calls him a kind child. The next morning, the protagonist goes to make a delivery. The man who receives it is surprised, thinking that Ron would be in charge of deliveries now since that's what he said. Still, Ray tells him they should evacuate too, because they won't get any customers if a war breaks out, but the man says he has nowhere to go. Besides, he doesn't believe in that whole war story. Ray asks why. The man says Hector and Niles are talking right now in the back of the store, and if they come to an agreement, the war might not happen. Right after that, the door opens, and a few of Hector's men show up. With them is Hector himself. He sees the protagonist there and says it's impressive that a child is working in a place where all the adults have given up. That's why he praises the boy, saying that's the right way to survive in this world. Hector also gives Ray some spare change, telling him he can use it to buy food, and then he leaves. However, Humphrey, one of Hector's men, stares closely at the boy. He notices that Ray has an injury on his ear. The protagonist realizes he's being watched and tries to hide. He wonders if Humphrey recognized him. Either way, Humphrey's boss calls for him, because they have to leave now. The shop owner feels relieved that they've finally gone. Ray realizes the enemy isn't dumb and probably recognized him. He just doesn't understand why he left without saying anything. Then they go to see Niles, and when they arrive at the back of the store, Niles says the negotiation was a failure. Therefore, there will be a war between them. After the revelation that there will be a war, the store owner shows disappointment. Niles says he can't accept the ridiculous terms that were proposed because that would destroy his organization. He regrets it, but says the shopkeeper will have to close the store for a while. He also tells the protagonist not to leave his hiding place for some time. Ray leaves after that, and on the way, he thinks he won't be able to walk the streets like this until the war ends, concluding that he'll have to gather as much food as possible before it begins. But right after, a car passes in front of him, and driving the vehicle was Humphrey. The protagonist thinks he's never seen a car like that in Sector 50, which he finds suspicious, so he needs to investigate it thoroughly. Thus, he heads to Street 18, territory of Hector's group. There, Hector himself is welcoming someone. From the car steps out an important man, whom Hector calls a mage. Ray has never seen this man before, but he notices a large amount of dark blue mana, almost black, mana similar to the golem that moves around out there. Additionally, Ray wonders what those rings are around the man's blood vessel. There's a lot of mana around the rings too. It's as if he's using those rings to keep the mana from leaking out. The protagonist realizes this is dangerous, so he figures he'd better warn Niles about his discovery. He goes to Niles' organization's headquarters and finds his men loading a lot of weaponry. Ray asks one of the men where Niles is. The man is startled by the boy's sudden arrival and asks how he got there. The protagonist says the gate was open and he wants to talk to their boss. With that, the man says their boss is preparing for war, so it's dangerous to stay there, and he tells the boy to leave. Ray then decides to leave a message, but he knows he can't mention mana to a stranger, so he tells the man to warn Niles to be careful with the man who wears a monocle. After that, he goes home. Upon seeing the children sleeping, he says the war won't end anytime soon. Pale worries about who will win the war, but Ray can't say because both groups are big and well prepared. However, he thinks that for the sake of these children, Niles needs to win, because if Hector's group wins, the children will face a much worse fate. Then they hear a strange noise and think the war must have already started. The sound keeps getting worse, and Pale becomes truly frightened. For his part, the protagonist thinks he's never heard a sound like this before and realizes something is wrong. Near Street 17, an armed confrontation is happening. Niles' soldiers are stunned while facing an enemy because they fired a lot, but it was useless. They are facing a golem that retaliates using magic that emanates an energy very similar to what the protagonist described earlier. Niles' men don't stand a chance against this creature. Because of that, they fall into despair. Meanwhile, the creature only wants to finish what it started. The golem stands before the last remaining soldier and defeats him like it was nothing. The man's bodily fluids even splash far away. Nearby, there's the mage allied with Hector. He's the one responsible for creating the golem, and he orders his creation to take care of everything in its path. The kids can hear the sounds. Ray wants to go take a closer look, but Pale stops him. He says he wants to go along so they can protect each other, but the protagonist insists that he needs to go alone. In the middle of this argument, one of the children wakes up. Pale apologizes for speaking so loudly and tells the boy to go back to sleep. Ray signals that he needs to go, so Pale agrees to let him go and says he'll keep an eye on the children. He doesn't like the idea of Ray going out alone like that, but he tells him not to go too far and to return as soon as he finds out what's happening. Thus, the protagonist heads to the war zone and comes across a devastated scene. Amidst all of it, Ray finds the man he spoke to earlier. The man is still alive and recognizes the protagonist. Then he reveals that the enemy has a golem on their side. He also says the man with the monocle, the one Ray had mentioned, is behind all of this. He says his soldiers weren't enough to stop them, so all that's left for Ray is to run from there. That way, the protagonist confirms his suspicions. Ray hears the soldier's final words and closes the man's eyes. After that, he picks up a blade, realizing that if things continue like this, Niles' group is going to lose very quickly, so he needs to help him in the war. At the same time, under the bridge, the children are in danger because chaos didn't take long to reach them. Pale tried to protect them as he had promised, but he's not a fighter, and because of that, most of them perished as the golem attacked without a hint of mercy. Pale stands in the monster's sights, already knowing this is the end for him. His last wish is that Ray doesn't return there as promised. In the midst of all the conflict, Ray realizes he arrived too late because all the men lying on the ground belonged to Niles' group, but he didn't see Niles himself, so he concludes he must still be alive. Lost in thought, the protagonist is caught off guard by the sound of an explosion. He quickly realizes it's coming from the direction of the bridge where he lives, so he runs toward it. When he arrives at the scene, he comes face to face with a golem. Ray stops running when he sees it and breathes through his mouth, exhausted. But he sees that he didn't run fast enough, because on the ground, after the golem's shot, there was nothing left. This leaves him deeply shocked. The rage he feels upon seeing that drives Ray to leap toward the enemy and try to strike it with his blade, but the golem senses a presence nearby and swiftly hits the protagonist in midair. Ray wasn't expecting that. His lack of preparation allowed the enemy to land a direct hit, something that usually doesn't happen since he's always faster than his opponents. This time, he wasn't fast enough to save his companions. Ray has a sudden memory of when he would come home with food and was always welcomed with joy by the children. They all treated him like an older brother, both the boys and the girls. His return home was always a reason for happiness for everyone, but this time things are different because he sees Pale saying he shouldn't have come back home. After that, the sight Ray is met with is horrifying, because the same children who used to welcome him with joy are now in a deplorable state. The enemy had found them and put an end to their happiness. The protagonist never expected something like this to happen. He wanted to repay them for their help, but he never wanted to see them perish because of him. While Ray grieves, the golem approaches. The sound the monster makes is the same one he heard during the battle, so there's no doubt that the golem was responsible for what happened to the children. However, the children weren't the only victims. The men from Niles' group who were defeated were in a similar state. With that, the protagonist feels a desire for vengeance. He wants to make the monster pay, but to do that, he needs to be able to move. The golem, who was about to fire, is suddenly struck by a car. Ray is stunned by this. He never imagined something like that would happen. Either way, thanks to that help, he manages to escape the enemy's attack. Niles appears as the driver and asks if Ray is okay. He gets out of the car and goes over to the boy. Seeing him up close, he says it looks like Ray broke a few bones, but the protagonist isn't worried about himself. He's worried about the children he swore to protect. He tells Niles what happened, worried and also frustrated by it all. Niles says he's sorry that he didn't make it in time to save them. Ray tells him it's not his fault. The boy, showing compassion, shakes Niles emotionally, so he hugs him, showing affection. And the boy, who always acts coldly, actually returns the gesture this time. Some time later, Ray asks what happened to Niles' subordinates. He replies that they all died in the war, since he hadn't expected to fight against mages. The protagonist asks what he'll do now. Niles says that first, he'll go back to the streets to search for survivors. However, he's caught off guard and struck from behind. Ray realizes the golem wasn't completely defeated, and still managed to attack them. The monster, still on the ground, unleashed an attack that hit Niles directly. As the boy watches in concern, Niles still tries to lighten the situation with humor, but he can't stay on his feet after that, and soon after, collapses in Ray's arms. When Ray realizes that Niles has been struck, the protagonist asks himself why this is happening. It awakens something in his heart. Ray remembers the moments when he trained with Niles, and the moments they shared meals together. The young man was more than a mentor, he was a friend, and seeing him get struck like that made the protagonist's heart burn from within. In front of him, the golem approaches, and stands before the boy, ready to attack him too. But something unexpected happens to Ray. His recent losses caused emotions to begin manifesting within him, something that once seemed impossible. On top of that, Ray feels the black rain, the blood, and the sweat around him, while still holding Niles in his arms. He tries to properly process what happened, because everything still feels like a dream or a nightmare. Just moments ago, his friend was standing, talking to him. Then his friend fell, after being suddenly struck. Not only that, now Ray is the golem's next target. However, the anger awakened within the protagonist also granted him a surge in power. This way, he managed to strike back at the enemy, using a magic just as powerful as the golems. As their attacks collided, a massive shockwave was unleashed. Even with all of that, Ray stares down the golem, saying that he is different from it, because now he considers himself human, capable of feeling real emotions that fuel his attack, which finally ends the golem for good. The intense fire that burst from the protagonist melted the monster completely. Afterward, he goes back to worrying about Niles, and tries to wake him up, saying his friend can't leave just yet. Niles can still speak, and tells Ray not to shake him because he's in a lot of pain. He also says he never imagined he'd die peacefully, he just didn't think it would be now. He claims he doesn't regret anything because he achieved a lot for someone who started as an opportunist. Niles wonders if things would have been different had he fought a bit earlier. He started around Ray's current age. Before Ray leaves, he wants to give him a medicine from the car or something like that, and says the boy should leave that place soon and go somewhere better. Niles says he always thought of Ray like a younger brother. He tells Ray to swim upstream and not let himself be carried away by the current, just like they agreed before. Niles had promised to give him a car, so he hands Ray the keys to his car, and that was his last gift to his adopted little brother. After taking his final breath, Ray is in disbelief that he's witnessed so many losses in just one day. He becomes overwhelmed by countless emotions, a mix of rage and despair, something he had never felt before. Due to his injuries, Ray can't move properly. He only managed to get away from the rain and crawl under the bridge, but he's still in a lot of pain since the blow he took was really strong. Ray manages to sleep a little and feels like he had a long dream. Quickly, he remembers what happened the night before and realizes it wasn't just a dream. His emotions were on edge, and something definitely changed within him. Ray feels magic flowing through him more strongly. He realizes that the stronger his rage, the stronger the flame he can summon. That means the strength of his emotions affects the strength of his magic. But now he's too weak to think about that. Even so, he knows he has to go. So he gathers his strength to stand up and head toward his revenge, no matter if the outcome is good or bad. In the center of Street 17, people are already suffering under Hector's Rube's victory. Ray slips through the alleys and spots the one responsible for all this mess. With that, he gets ready to attack. But before he can do it, someone approaches him. Ray quickly strikes on reflex, only to realize afterward that it was Humphrey standing in front of him. The man ends up getting grazed by the attack, but he doesn't intend to fight the boy and tries to calm him down. However, his words are useless, because to the protagonist, everyone allied with Hector deserves to die, so he relentlessly attacks his enemy. Humphrey sees that the boy's movements are insanely fast, and realizes he's stronger than the first time they fought. He soon concludes that if this keeps up, he'll lose. Then Ray lands a clean hit on him, but he notices the enemy got hit on purpose. Humphrey used that to his advantage, to lure the boy close enough to land a counterattack. After that, Humphrey asks if the boy would really choose to die for something as trivial as revenge. He knows the boy is known as the Ghost of Street 17, but instead of finishing him off, he has an offer to make to Ray. Humphrey says he's certain that Ray doesn't intend to die like a dog for something like revenge. After all, he's the Ghost of 17th Street. That's why he has a suggestion to make. He says he's been watching Ray for a long time, and would like to ask him to hear what he has to say. Ray knows that Humphrey is known for being silent. They call him that because he's a quiet man who performs his duties flawlessly. But this very same Humphrey is now wearing a desperate expression, and it doesn't seem like he intends to do any harm. So Ray agrees to listen to what he has to say. Humphrey says he would like Ray to come to Sector 50. He says he needs help finding his brother, a brother who was sold by Hector to the city of mages. Hector promised to reveal information about his brother if Humphrey worked for him for 10 years, so he agreed to take the job. He also says his brother should be around the same age as Ray, which is why he needs his help. Humphrey also knows that Ray is a magic user. He figured it out after the last battle at the warehouse. But he says that even with magic, Ray won't be able to defeat Hector, because there is a terrible magic protecting him. From within Humphrey, you can see the black mana of fear spreading through his body. He says that if any member of Hector's inner circle dares to defy him, Hector will freeze them completely. He even drowned a guy once by placing a water bubble around his head. Besides that, he's an incredibly powerful and cruel mage. Therefore, Humphrey tells Ray to get out of there for now, because he needs to survive if he wants a chance at revenge. The protagonist thinks it makes sense. He never actually learned magic, only used it by instinct up until now, while his opponent is an experienced mage, so the chances of defeating him are minimal. Ray's heard that the city of mages is somewhere upstream, and only mages can enter it. Then Humphrey takes all the money he has saved and offers it to Ray. Along with it, he gives him a paper with his brother's name and a few more details. Ray asks why he's entrusting all his money to someone he barely knows. Humphrey replies that he trusts the boy and knows that Ray doesn't usually break his promises. Plus, he himself witnessed that Ray is definitely skilled enough to move up to a higher level sector. But he says that the other members of Hector's group are approaching and Ray needs to decide quickly. In turn, the protagonist says he has one condition. He wants Humphrey to take care of all the bodies under the bridge. Only then will he agree to help find his brother. Humphrey agrees, promising to honor the deal. That way, Ray tells Humphrey to wait for him, because he will return with what was agreed. Sometime later, Ray heads to the street he usually roams. He had run a lot and is therefore tired. After looking around carefully, he realizes he wasn't followed, which was his main concern. Then he goes to see old Viola. Upon arriving, he says he has a question, but he doesn't have time, so he needs her to answer quickly. Viola guesses what Ray's question is, so she affirms that the rainbow story is true. The protagonist is surprised by the old woman's wisdom. In any case, he asks if, by finding the end of the rainbow, he could really make a wish. Ray had heard this from one of the children he used to care for. At the time, the boy described the rainbow as a long, colorful band that appears when the rain stops, like a pretty, colorful donut with a bite taken out of it, claiming that if you found where the rainbow touched the ground, you could make any wish, and it would be granted. The protagonist didn't take the story very seriously, which really upset the boy, because Ray's dismissiveness made the child quite irritated. But now things are different, and Ray is considering going after the rainbow, which is why he went to the old woman for more information. Viola says the rainbow is real, regardless of whether or not you can make a wish when you find it. Ray notices there are no tremors in Viola's mana. It's the same soft purple as always. Still, he can't tell if she's lying or not, but it's not baseless. Once he asked Humphrey the same question, and he said that a mage once showed up looking for something similar. Maybe even a rainbow. Ray now knows that a mage was also looking for a rainbow. That means they had solid proof of the rainbow's existence. So he asks, if he finds that rainbow, will he be able to bring the dead back to life? Viola simply says that no one knows. She says only that, according to the legend, the person will be able to make any wish come true. However, no one actually knows where a rainbow truly is, because it's always seen from a distance. For Ray, that's enough. He thanks her and tells Viola that for her own safety, it would be good for her to move away. Sometime later, on the other side of Sector 50, Ray goes to the place Niles had written on the note. He doesn't see anyone approaching. He only finds a white car parked nearby, exactly as Niles described before. As soon as the protagonist touches the car, one of Hector's men appears. He knows Ray used to hang around with Niles and asks if he was ordered to bring that car. He also asks where Niles is. Ray, on his part, thought he had shaken off all of Hector's men and can't waste any more time with this guy. So he decides to get into the car quickly, which makes the man angry because he doesn't want to let the boy escape. Ray gets into the car and tries to start it, but the man manages to open the door and tries to pull the boy out. They begin to struggle with each other until Ray realizes he has no choice but to use magic to get rid of this guy. So he summons a fireball and fires it at the nuisance, forcing the man away from the car. With that, the door is clear. Ray manages to start the car and slams the accelerator, speeding away from the place at full speed. To the protagonist, this means that he is finally out of Sector 50. The protagonist heads toward his goal, this time with a car. Along the way, there's nothing but wreckage and animals searching for scraps. Midway through, Ray decides to stop and check the trunk. There he finds a small supply stash and realizes that Niles truly was always prepared. But he knows that at this pace, he won't reach the next sector within the next few days. Ray thinks he needs to learn more about magic once he gets to the next sector. All he knows now is that there are two types of mana. Red mana, which can be used without any special preparation, and another kind of mana that requires combined colors. Using mana is not easy, but it is possible to channel emotions to use mana, which makes the task easier to accomplish. However, the only emotion he can channel right now is pure hatred, especially after everything he's been through. That allows him to summon red mana. He runs a test to see how far he can go, concluding that if he loses focus on the emotion, his mana disappears. After that, he decides to try some combinations. After a few attempts, he achieves a result and manages to generate a different energy sphere, but shortly afterward, it vanishes, leaving the protagonist's mind confused. Incompatible types of mana repel each other. Combining colors requires delicate effort, and therefore demands great mental strength. But in exchange, there are combinations that will definitely work well with one another. Ray decides to keep combining for now. That wasn't necessary for him before, but things are different now, because there's a reason for it. The next day, he continues his journey, and makes a few stops along the way to rest and drink some water. At night, he stops and practices a bit with colored mana. Little by little, he gets different results. Ray begins learning to better control this power, even though the task isn't easy. After practicing a lot, he decides to stop. He thinks he can extract mana more carefully, because if he can store mana in his vessel and use it when needed, it would make the whole process more efficient, like the circles around the mage's vessel. Therefore, he wants to look for a way to do that once he reaches Sector 49. Far from there, in Sector 50, under the bridge, Hector's men are conducting a search, but they find nothing. The mage is overseeing the search for the golem. Frustrated by the results, he threatens one of the men. The man begs for his life, asking for more time to search, but the mage says he hates it when people don't understand him. With a magic rod pointed at his face, the man trembles in fear, until he touches the item with his finger, following the mage's command. This activates the cane's magic, which begins transforming him. Shortly afterward, the man is completely frozen. With that, the mage disposes of the frozen man, and even drives over him with the car, claiming the guy was useless. On the other side of the bridge, the men find the golem's trail. Not only that, they also find fragments of the creature. The mage notices that mana was used there, and it was quite strong. He follows the magical trail until he finds something interesting, and asks one of the men if he knows anything about who used to live there. The man says some homeless children live under the bridge. They were also orphans and probably perished in the war. Soon, the mage wonders how an orphan could be capable of using magic. Such a fact leaves him deeply intrigued, to the point of laughing out loud just thinking about the possibility. To the mage, it's impressive that a street orphan could use magic, because discovering even one of the infinite combinations of elemental magic on your own isn't for just anyone. It's so unlikely to happen that the mage believes it's improbable, concluding that another mage showed up and destroyed his golem. He then orders his men to find out what really happened, but in his thoughts, he doesn't rule out the possibility of the orphan using magic. Even though it's hard to believe, deep down he knows there might be a chance, and such an orphan could be a genius who might become an archmage like the world has never seen before. Meanwhile, the protagonist has just arrived in Sector 49. A flashback shows a conversation that Niles and Ray had in the past. Niles said that Sector 42 is similar to this place, a real mess. If he had to mention a difference, it would be that it's larger than Sector 50, the buildings are taller, and there are more streets. The same happens in the lower sectors. The farther upstream you go, the more dramatic the changes in the scenery. Back in the present, as soon as Ray arrives at the location, he understands what Niles was talking about. Either way, he enters the sector, and notices that there are also children scavenging through trash there. However, he doesn't see any golems nearby, so he wonders how the children managed to get food in this sector. After some time walking, Ray reaches 36th Street and realizes there are at least twice as many streets as in Sector 50, so he needs to hurry. He wants to find more information about magic as quickly as possible, especially about that mage and his container circles, since that will be the key to his revenge. He also needs to investigate the prismatic colors and the City of Mages. Ray thinks he also needs money, because the amount Humphrey gave him won't last very long. After walking a bit, the protagonist sees something that catches his attention. A bookstore called Veronica. Upon reading the sign on the front, he thinks the name refers to a person. Also, he doesn't know what a bookstore is. This unlocks another memory of his. Once, Niles was teaching him about symbols, but Ray wasn't very interested at the time. Now he realizes that might have been useful. Either way, he decides to go in and investigate further. Inside the store, he sees something he describes as rows of squares with letters inside them. Suddenly, the protagonist is startled because someone yells at him. A girl says it was the protagonist who broke her window and came to steal her books again. The girl tells him to leave because she doesn't want to be robbed again. Ray doesn't know what the concept of books is, so upon hearing the girl say that word, he assumes she's referring to the items he sees in front of him. While the girl yells at him, the protagonist takes the opportunity to analyze her mana and notices she has a blend of several colors, and wonders if it's really possible for someone to feel so many emotions. The girl says the adults are coming downstairs now and asks if he's still going to stand there. Ray asks what she's talking about and calls her a weirdo. That makes the girl even angrier, to the point that she says her dad is huge and will do a lot of damage. In turn, the protagonist just decides to leave and lets her talk to herself. After that, he walks through the city center and notices some strange things around him, like a group of kids who are apparently looking for trouble. Ray notices in one of the boys a cautious look, as expected, since he's a stranger walking through their streets. The protagonist concludes that these boys must think he's there to provoke them, so he thinks this is no different from Sector 50. He returns to his car to rest. Before falling asleep, Ray thinks about how he walked the streets of the city but found nothing about mages. Therefore, he'll have to search more carefully the next day. But just as he closes his eyes to sleep, he hears something. The boys from earlier had followed him, and Ray realizes he'll have to postpone his rest. Just by listening to their footsteps, he already knows there are 4 of them. The boys get very close to the car. Their intention is to scare the vehicle's owner and steal the keys. But before they can try anything, the protagonist quickly strikes first, hitting the gang leader directly. This causes the rest of the group to lose their will to fight. Ray circles around the car to catch the boys off guard, successfully landing surprise blows on them. The boy who got punched screams in pain, but to the protagonist this is necessary, because he's acting in self-defense. Seeing his friend fall, another boy tries to attack with a bladed weapon. However, Ray easily stops the attack, proving he's much stronger than they are. Desperate, the boy tries to retreat. However, Ray has dealt with situations like this before and knows exactly what to do. To the boy's despair, things do not end well for him. After teaching the whole group a solid lesson, Ray asks how many streets in the city they control, and says that if they don't answer, it'll be worse. The protagonist repeats the question again, but the street kids refuse to answer, so Ray starts being rougher with them, until one of the boys says they control 3 streets. Then Ray asks which ones they are. As the boy answers, Ray sees that he's feeling anxious, uncomfortable, and afraid. With that, he realizes he's hearing lies, so he starts getting even rougher with them. Ray notices that this boy won't talk easily, so he changes targets. The next boy is trembling with fear, and before even getting hurt, he already starts talking. He tells the protagonist everything he wanted to know about the streets and their leadership. After that, Ray tells the boy to lift his head and asks his name. The boy introduces himself as Neshu, and so Ray asks what orders he received from his leader. Neshu says they were ordered to eliminate the outsider and steal everything he had. Not only that, but their leader said he wanted to watch it all happen. Right after that, another gang member reveals himself and tries to attack the protagonist by surprise, but Ray already knew he had been watching for a while. He uses his magic to push the enemy away. With that, a strong wind blows dust into the gang leader's eyes. Now that he can't see properly, he becomes an easy target, so Ray punishes him appropriately. The protagonist approaches the boy and knows that he's not their real leader. He grabs the enemy by the hair, telling him to warn his boss that he's not the only one watching from afar. The next day, Ray returns to the city. He didn't find any information about magic before, but he heard that there are these things called books, which are simply papers that contain various kinds of information, and surely one of them must have what he's looking for. In the middle of his walk, another group of boys approaches him, saying that the protagonist should come with them. Ray says he's not there to fight, so they should calm down. The boys say they've been watching him since the previous day, and they also know what he did to their comrades last night. That's why the boy says his boss liked the way the protagonist fights and wants to meet him. Then he pulls out a piece of paper with a message from his boss. But neither the boy nor his friends can read, so they don't know what it says. Ray takes the paper from his hand, saying that he can read. The boys are shocked by this, as they thought the protagonist was also a street kid, and among them, only their boss knows how to read. The note says that the gang's leader wants Ray to work for him, promising that he won't regret it. So Ray asks how the group chose their leader. They reply that it was through fighting. The strongest one became the gang leader. With that, he agrees to go with them, saying he's willing to meet their leader. After walking for a while, they arrive at an abandoned factory. The one in charge of the group says that's where their boss is, then opens the door for them to enter. There isn't much inside, as it's an empty warehouse with plenty of space. Either way, at the center of the place stands the leader, surrounded by his gang. Right away, the boss recognizes Ray. After all, he had been watching from afar. He introduces himself as Kedrick, leader of the Street Boys. Ray also formally introduces himself, but when he observes Kedrick's mana, he is startled, because he remembers moments when mana flowed from garbage, but he has never seen an object with so much mana before. For his part, Kedrick tells Ray to sit down, claiming that he's not his enemy, but rather a guest. However, the other boys don't like Ray's presence there. The protagonist realizes that the leader wants to assert dominance. He looks to be around Ray's age, yet he also shows proficiency. Kedrick says he likes Ray even more now that he's seen him in person because he can tell he's strong. He also mentions hearing that Ray arrived by car and asks where he came from. The protagonist replies that he's from Sector 50, which leaves the other boys quite shaken. They start thinking it's a lie since they've never heard of anyone from Sector 50 making it to their city. But the boss tells them to stay quiet. Kedrick says that if it's true, it only makes Ray even more qualified to join his organization. Ray asks if that's what he calls it. The boss answers yes. He says his plan was to join a real organization, one called Merc Red, which is apparently very famous in Sector 45. He says his group has an agreement to join them once they have 66 members, and that this is a chance to raise their personal status, so he asks if that's not reason enough for Ray to join them. The protagonist says that's an interesting story. However, he's not interested in joining the group, claiming that he doesn't work for anyone but himself. After that, silence settles over the place. The group leader is outraged by being rejected, so he asks if Ray is saying he's stronger than him. Kedrick believes his leadership is justified because he's the strongest there, so he doesn't like feeling challenged. Ray says that in Sector 50, a leader is chosen by strength, not by the ability to talk. One of the boys immediately starts insulting Ray for his boldness, but his own leader grabs him by the throat. Kedrick asks if anyone gave him permission to speak. He also says they all know very well that they shouldn't interrupt the leader when he's speaking. Watching everything, Ray notices that the leader is siphoning mana from the others through the ring he's wearing. He also realizes that Kedrick isn't using his own magic, but the magic of the item. Kedrick's ring emits very strong mana. Ray asks one of the boys if it's not going to stop, but he realizes that Kedrick will only stop once he no longer has that ring. A moment later, he lets go of the boy and apologizes for the interruption. Then he says they can continue the conversation where they left off. The protagonist has seen enough, so he decides to test something. He then provokes the gang leader, saying he's stronger than him. Extremely irritated, Kedrick tells Ray to repeat that if he has the guts. In the height of his rage, he says he's the strongest among all of them, and none of the boys dare to disagree. Ray realizes that the ring reacts to the emotions of its wearer. Seeing how Kedrick didn't react when the ring's mana was cut off, the protagonist notices that the opponent doesn't know what the ring is actually doing for him. Either way, Kedrick felt challenged and asks if Ray wants to witness his strength. In response, the protagonist proposes a fight between them to determine who's stronger. He says that if he wins, he'll take over as the gang's leader, but if he loses, he'll work for Kedrick. Kedrick agrees, but says the fight won't happen right now and asks for 1 week. He wants everyone to watch him win the fight, not just his own crew, but also the other gangs. That way, it will be clear to everyone who the strongest really is. Ray agrees, but he asks where the boss got that ring. Kedrick says he'll find out if he beats him in the duel, though he believes that won't happen. The next day, Ray walks through the city again. In addition to his search for information about magic, he also thinks about the ring the enemy possesses. However, during his walk, a stone is thrown at him, and with quick reflexes, he catches it. Some troublemakers approach him, asking who gave him permission to walk around like that. Another group arrives from the opposite direction, surrounding Ray, saying he must be lost in thought. Now that Ray is surrounded, they say there's no way out without going through them. Without any patience, the protagonist tells them to shut up. He also says that if they want to fight, then they should just come at him already. After giving them a good beating, Ray thinks that no matter where he goes, there are always those who want to confront him. Plus, the news about his fight with Kedrick must have already spread. He also thinks that although Kedrick's gang isn't attacking as instructed, that doesn't apply to the other gangs. Allowing a stranger to walk around unharmed wounds their pride. Even the other gangs are forming alliances to keep things under control. Everything is going according to plan. Ray's magic grows stronger the more he gets used to it. As he gains more experience, he casts spells faster and uses less mental energy. Starting fights was a good choice in his view. However, he notices something is following him and asks how long that person plans to keep just watching. The observer is then discovered and finally steps out of the shadows. However, it turns out to be just a boy. Upon meeting Ray, he asks if he's the hunter. The protagonist notices that this boy is smaller than the others, but walks alone and doesn't seem good at fighting, something he finds strange. Either way, he tells the boy to take off his glasses, because it'll hurt his hands when they break. But the boy says he's not here to fight. He realizes the protagonist is confused about why he's there. The boy tries to calm him down and says he just followed the trail of bodies Ray left behind. Ray then asks what the boy wants from him. The boy seems a little uneasy, but introduces himself as Philip and says he has a proposal to make. Sometime later, Philip takes the protagonist to the place where he works, a junkyard to the west of the city. He says he's heard many rumors about the hunter, and that in every part of the city, someone's talking about it. Ray isn't used to such a nickname and figures he started being called that after his recent feats. They keep walking a bit more, until they finally reach the place Philip wanted to show. The boy opens the door to a warehouse. He says that's where all the city's shoeshine boys are. Seeing all of this, Ray is impressed. Philip says this is his hotel. Currently, there are about 100 people there, but the capacity is even greater than that. Ray notices they all have something in common. Apparently, it's hard for them to join other groups. They're all young or physically small. Philip says they have many people working in Sector 49, but they're not fighters. Then Ray asks what happened to the adult. The boy says they all died. That's why there's a lot of work to be done. Shops are willing to hire even kids. There are even too many of them for the groups that control the streets. So in exchange for maintaining the labor monopoly with some of those groups, he agreed to pay them a small bribe and send workers if needed. Philip is a kind of broker and even offers shelter. The boy claims he worked hard to build all this. Then he finds a boy named Jonathan, who shows up saying the restaurant he works at is wonderful and doing well. Jonathan also contributes to the month's earnings. After that, he continues his route, and Philip writes down another contribution in his notebook. He says he has to log it immediately for record keeping. Philip shows the hotel's report book and says the protagonist can take a look if he wants. Ray then flips through the notebook, realizing that Philip had investigated him thoroughly before approaching. The boy asks if the protagonist can read. Ray says yes, so the boy apologizes for what he wrote, but says it had to be done because he needed to observe him before making contact. In turn, the protagonist says Philip is the opposite of him in that sense. He also says there's no need to apologize because he doesn't mind. Sometime later, they go to a special room. Some guys are surprised to see Philip accompanied and say they can't let anyone pass through there except him. But Philip says this is the hunter he talked about earlier and says he finally managed to bring him in. That way, Philip reassures his guards and enters the room with the protagonist. The boy says this is his room and that the protagonist can feel at home inside. Philip says that when he first heard about the protagonist, he thought he was a con artist. He also says he believes that credit is the most important thing in business. You can always earn money back, but once you lose credit, it's hard to recover it. Ray thinks Philip doesn't even seem close to his age, but he's curious to hear about the proposal he mentioned earlier. Philip thinks the protagonist is still a bit scary, but he needs to overcome that fear if he wants to profit here. So he says he has a genuine proposal for Ray, and he wants him as a business partner, because after defeating Kedrick and becoming the new leader, they could earn a lot together. After hearing the boy's proposal, Ray thinks that he has less black mana than before, because he was afraid, but now he's full of courage. Ray then asks if the boy doesn't think he might lose the duel. Philip says he can't rule out that possibility, but his guess is that the protagonist has a high probability of winning. He believes this because he observed Ray just like he does with other people, and after witnessing his abilities, he has a good idea of how the duel will end. Philip noticed that when Ray talks to people, he has a habit of looking down, aiming at people's chests instead of their eyes. He thinks the protagonist may have some sort of trauma related to people's eyes or faces. Either way, Philip believes he has a good eye for people. In turn, Ray asks what else the boy discovered about him. Philip says that Ray is right-handed and always steps with his right foot when turning, maybe because he's subconsciously preparing in case he encounters an enemy. The protagonist thinks it's the first time he's heard such a detailed and specific analysis about himself. Until now, people had only seen him superficially and viewed him as someone cold and frightening. Even now, aside from anger and sadness, Ray thinks he needs to focus just to feel emotions. So he wonders why Philip seems like a clue to how someone should grow emotionally. Anyway, the boy says that Kedrick has a habit of getting carried away by emotions when he fights, but it seems that Ray fights by reading the opponent's movements. But in the middle of his rambling, the protagonist says he accepts the proposal. Philip says he hasn't finished his explanation and didn't even mention the payment. Ray says he'll let the boy handle the details. He just tells him not to get too excited. Besides that, he says he has one condition. He realizes that Philip has strong connections in the city, so he wants his help to search for something specific. 2 days after the meeting, Ray gets help with his car, and the mechanic says it's true that he's from Sector 50, because judging by the condition of the car, it's clear he crossed a desert to get there. By the way, the mechanic says that Philip really trusts Ray, since he rarely sends someone like him to assist strangers. Then, the mechanic asks Ray for a specific tool. Ray looks at the wrench beside him and uses his magic to guide the tool to the mechanic. The guy didn't even see the wrench arriving and even thought the tool had been beside him the whole time. Sometime later, the mechanic finishes the job. He explains in detail the repairs that were done. He also says he brought some parts from the store where he works, but that's a secret. Besides, he's doing a favor for Philip, so he wanted to give it his best, since if it weren't for Philip's help, he wouldn't even have a job. Before leaving, he hands the protagonist a note from Philip. Since the message was hard to memorize, he preferred to bring it in writing. After that, the mechanic says goodbye and leaves. Ray reflects a bit on the message. Once he told Philip that he was looking for information about mages. The boy had heard of them before and promised to gather information on anyone who seemed even slightly suspicious, and assured it wouldn't take long. Back to the present, Ray is surprised that in just 2 days, Philip actually managed to find something, unlike him. But when he reads the message, Ray sees it's a list of descriptions of different people and addresses, who apparently show behavior different from the norm. The information doesn't confirm that these people are actually mages, so he decides to visit the addresses to verify the info. Upon arriving at the first place, he finds a restaurant worker and watches him from a distance. But he notices no magical artifacts or mana presence in the man, so he crosses his name off the list. Only one of the people on the list stood out when a pipe fell from a rooftop due to an accident. A strong wind blew it away, and the man below narrowly avoided an accident. He didn't seem the least bit surprised by what happened, which to the protagonist means that man was a mage. Ray then decides to visit the bookstore he found earlier. but finds it closed. Some boys have been vandalizing the place for days and are talking about making things worse. Rei hides to listen to their conversation and realizes that they are the ones responsible for the mess the girl previously blamed him for. Just as the boys prepare to throw rocks, the same girl appears again and yells at them. She says she heard everything and tries to stop them from throwing stones at her family's shop. Rei notices her mana, realizing that the girl radiates courage and conviction. However, she also seems scared. The unruly boys are not intimidated by her and say they're going to keep vandalizing. The girl tries to argue, saying that the adults will come after them, but one of the boys almost hits her with a stone. They even laugh about it and mock the girl, saying it's safer for her to go back inside. The protagonist hears everything from the dark alley. Meanwhile, the boys keep throwing stones, but this time, aiming at the girl. Rei then decides to act, but something catches his attention. An energy is summoned through mana, and the stone is held midair, protecting the girl. The boys don't understand what just happened. The girl was the one who used the magic, to the surprise of the unruly boys, and also of the protagonist himself. The troublemakers wonder what will happen now, since they were completely caught off guard. For his part, Rei realizes the girl is a mage. She's extremely nervous but tries to ward off danger however she can. Even after witnessing the use of magic, the bullies still want to keep throwing stones. They believe that if they throw more than one, she won't be able to defend herself. However, it's the protagonist who steps in now. He uses his magic to block the stones. Not only that, he summons wind energy to blow the enemies away and stop them from throwing more. The thrown stones are turned against them. The boys try to protect themselves, but end up tasting their own medicine. Rei appears to confront them directly, but the bullies are already out of commission, so he tells the girl that the situation is under control. After taking care of those who threatened her, the girl thanks the protagonist for the help. Rei says there's no need to be so formal, but mentions that he has a question he'd like to clear up, asking if the girl is a mage. She hesitates on how to respond since she saw him use magic too. Looking at the protagonist so closely makes her shy, so she steps back and says he can come in so they can talk better. With that, Rei is allowed inside the shop. The girl introduces herself as Veronica, daughter of the bookstore owners. Rei also introduces himself formally. Veronica remembers meeting him earlier and apologizes for her behavior, saying that boys always show up to vandalize, and she mistook him. Rei understands that it was just a misunderstanding, yet she still apologizes and thanks him for the help, regretting that she caused trouble for him. The protagonist says he was just passing by, as he only wanted to gain some magical knowledge, but meeting a mage was a bigger gain than expected. Veronica is surprised to hear that, since other people's reception toward mages isn't always pleasant. Rei shows curiosity about how she learned magic, and the girl says her grandfather taught her. To the protagonist, that's quite surprising, as he finally hears of a mage in the city. So he says he'd like to meet her grandfather. Veronica says she'll check with him. Then she notices that Rei is injured. He says he's fine, but the girl says that cut could cause an infection. Veronica asks him to wait a moment, then touches his face, and uses healing magic, making the wound heal very quickly. Rei is quite surprised by this, and asks how she did that. He's impressed by the fact that she used white mana to create a simple light and make his wound disappear. He himself has tried to control white mana, but never succeeded, no matter how hard he tried, because white mana only reacts when someone is caring and dedicated enough to sacrifice themselves, emotions that Rei considers himself incapable of feeling. In turn, Veronica claims she just used healing magic, nothing more, but she asks what he meant by white mana. Rei then realizes that only he can see the colors of mana, contrary to what he believed, that all mages had this ability. Veronica says she knows nothing about white mana, but asks if he's referring to the regeneration element. Since Rei doesn't know what that is, she explains that this element is what enables healing magic, along with 2 other additional elements. Besides that, there are more than 20 known elements, and that's only considering the natural ones, because beyond those, there are others responsible for different kinds of magic. Upon hearing all this, Rei thinks he learned a lot today, and wonders how much more he'll learn when he meets the girl's grandfather. Veronica says that her grandfather is on the 2nd floor, but he is sick and can't get out of bed for long. She then asks the protagonist to wait a minute, as she will go see if her grandfather can receive him. Rei agrees to wait for a bit. With that, he takes the opportunity to explore some of the books present there. He notices that some books are about topics he has never heard of before, and he's also heard they tend to be expensive. He looks at his dirty hands and thinks that by touching the books, he would lower their value. Stopping to think, he realizes it's been a while since he last bathed in the rain. He doesn't feel bothered by his smell, but he knows others probably do. This raises a doubt. He wonders whether Veronica has a bad sense of smell or is just being polite. Either way, he looks at a table and notices that it holds books different from the others, so he wonders what those could be. On the cover of one, it says Study of the Elemental Distribution of Sectors. Another one mentions something about the reason behind the spread of the black rain, which further sparks his curiosity. After Veronica comes down the stairs, she doesn't see Rei at first glance, so she asks if he left because of the wait, but the protagonist appears behind her, saying he's right there, which definitely gives her quite a scare. Veronica realizes he decided to walk around the shop, yet still feels bad after being startled like that. Ray says he looked around but didn't find any books about magic, but the girl asks if he drew that conclusion just by reading the book titles. The protagonist replies yes, and Veronica thinks he's more interesting than she expected. Either way, she says her grandfather can't receive him today due to his illness, so she asks Ray to come back the next day. He agrees, but before leaving, Veronica asks what his interest in her grandfather is, since it seemed like that was Ray's goal from the start. The protagonist then reveals that he's looking for the prism. Some time later, the protagonist goes to a restaurant. Although things are not pleasant for the poor in this world, the rich live a life of luxury. But he's not there to eat at the fancy restaurant. His goal is to follow clues about the suspicious mage. Nearby is where the suspect lives. Therefore, Ray thinks it's a good place to gather information. He was actually there to meet with an informant named Joni. Right after that, the waiter appears, who just happens to be the Joni Ray was looking for. Ray says he didn't order any food, but Joni replies that it's on the house, since he is the hunter, the children's hero. He also says Ray can ask him anything, and he will answer. The protagonist wonders how accurate the suspect's schedule is, but Joni assures him the information is 100% reliable. He says that over the past 3 months, he saw that man enter and leave the basement of the building across the street, always at the same time. After that, Joni's boss scolds him for talking during work, so he had to go back to work, but said Ray could call him if he needed anything else. The protagonist knows the suspect always shows up at 6, so he only needs to wait 1 more hour for the man to appear. Ray then enjoys the meal that was served, while waiting for the suspect to show up. Soon after, he sees the man he was looking for, walking outside the restaurant. Not only that, but he notices the man has a magical ring, leaving no doubt that he's a mage. Ray then leaves the restaurant and thanks them for the meal. He heads to the man's house, knowing the place is empty now, so he figures he'll have to find proof of magic inside before the suspect returns. Unsurprisingly, Ray notices the door is locked, but he can't just walk away. He'll have to find a way in. He then realizes his mana reacts to the door. It even flows through the keyhole. Ray realizes the door is magical and can only be opened with mana, so he manages to enter the house, but that's still surprising. Now he needs to focus on the objective and proceed with the search. The most important thing right now is to find information about magic. While rummaging through the trash, Ray finds a rough draft of a note, apparently from the suspect to his boss. Amidst a bunch of disjointed phrases, Ray finds something that catches his attention. A mention of 66 orphans, exactly the number Kedrick had referred to earlier. Judging by the contents of the letter, Ray concludes that the suspect was expelled from the organization. After that, he feels something different manifesting. He notices a jar nearby, which emanates a strong red mana. Upon opening the jar to check its contents, he sees some red stones, which by all indications are the same ones that were in Kedrick's ring. Therefore, Ray concludes that this must be the red stone the draft was referring to. It's still the same mana, but unlike the mana in the air, this gem can attract everything much more easily. Curious, Ray wonders what would happen if he tried to cast magic through this red stone fragment. To satisfy his curiosity, he decides to test it. With that, a great flame ignites through the use of the fragment. But before he could conduct more tests, the owner of the house arrives. Ray sees the man coming down the stairs and is startled that he returned earlier than expected. Quickly, the suspect enters the house. He forgot his wallet and came back to get it, calling himself an idiot for that, and believing that things like this are why his boss abandoned him. The man talks to himself. His name is Walter, and he says that once this is over, he'll return to his former organization. He also says he needs to buy more food than usual, so he can stay indoors longer without needing to go out. Ray didn't really understand what just happened, thinking the man was just talking to himself. The suspect turns to leave the house again, but then says he forgot one more thing. Suddenly, he notices the presence of the protagonist hiding behind the door and says that apparently he'll need a potion for rats. After confronting the intruder in his home, Walter says he knew from the beginning that the protagonist was there. But right after, Ray defends himself with a knife. Wounded, the man is forced to retreat. He gets quite angry about this and says he thought he was confronting an assassin from his old organization, but now he sees it's just a boy. Still confused, he asks how the protagonist managed to open the door to his house. Ray, however, isn't interested in talking since he realizes this could be dangerous, so there's nothing left to do but attack. But to his surprise, Walter interrupts his attack, grabbing the knife by the blade, and doesn't get hurt since he's protected by his magic. The man is also surprised as he's facing a boy stronger than he looks. Ray manages to distance himself from his opponent, but he can't stop thinking about how this man used mana to block his knife and protect himself from a cut. Speaking of blades, Walter draws one and says he was going easy on him because he's a kid. But now that he's witnessed the boy's strength, he won't hold back anymore. While dodging the enemy's attacks, Ray tries to understand how his opponent's magic works. Until, to the man's surprise, the protagonist manages to replicate his magic and grabs the enemy's blade just like he did a moment ago. Truly surprised, Walter says that this magic was invented by him, so he doesn't understand how someone managed to replicate it. For his part, Ray doesn't lower his guard. He waits for the right moment to strike, until he manages to wound the enemy with his blade. That way, the suspect starts to bleed. His blood loss causes him to lose some strength, to the point of falling to his knees on the floor. He begins to believe that the protagonist really is someone sent by his former boss to eliminate him, because only someone from his old organization could be capable of copying his magic. Ray carefully approaches the suspect, saying he has many questions to ask, and tells him that for his own good, he better answer all of them. But the man only says he's never seen or heard of such a young assassin before. Ray knows from personal experience that it's hard to have a proper conversation with this type, and if he can't extract any information, he figures it's better to eliminate him right then and there. But the enemy says that there's no other option for his boss to recognize his skills, claiming that the only alternative is to burn everything around him. He tells the boy to let the boss know that he'll soon receive a warm visit from Walter Blood-Eye. However, he says the boy will only be able to deliver the message if he survives his flames. Walter says he'll make his former boss regret abandoning him. Meanwhile, Ray notices that the mana is spinning the rings intensely, and because of that, the red mana is rapidly spreading throughout the enemy's body. Soon, Ray thinks that if he hadn't protected himself with mana, it could have been dangerous. The enemy says the assassin was sent there to eliminate him and steal the blood-red stone. However, he claims that the task won't be that easy. While the enemy attacks, Ray defends himself using mana, but the energy fired at him is quite intense. Upon seeing this, Walter says the boy should use a spell of equal caliber to his own, if he wants to make it out of this battle alive. Ray thinks he can't get close enough to the enemy because of the flames, and his protection won't last much longer. Then he is once again surprised by the enemy, because Walter practically turned into a living flame. The protagonist thinks he won't be able to defend against that, so he needs to find a way to disperse the flames. Meanwhile, Walter mocks the boy's feeble protection, but to his surprise, his fire starts getting suppressed. He doesn't understand how this is happening. He hadn't expected the boy to be able to use more than one type of magic at once. Upon seeing the protagonist manipulating water magic, Walter is shocked and says he can't be just an ordinary assassin. Ray, in turn, attacks him with water and extinguishes the enemy's flames. Some time later, he leaves the place completely soaked and walks through the dark alleys as he usually does. Only this time, he's feeling the effects of having used his magic to its physical and mental limits. Ray thinks that the power of fire magic was unmatched. The mana rings moved with great smoothness, and the blending speed of the colors was faster. Walter was truly powerful. He can't even imagine how strong that mage with the monocle must have been back in the day. Now the protagonist can't carry out his revenge with his current strength. However, with enough time, he will still grow much stronger. He thinks that if he had known things would turn out like this, he would have taken them all at once. The next morning, Ray returns to the bookstore. When he gets there, he meets Veronica, who welcomes him. She notices Ray changed clothes and is even cleaner. She also notices that he's no longer wearing the rain cloak. Ray, in turn, says he got rid of it. The protagonist thinks that although Walter hadn't seen his face because the room was dark, he might recognize him if he wore the same outfit. Veronica says she talked to her grandfather about Ray and mentioned the fact that he's looking for a rainbow. She also revealed that he's a mage. Amid all this, Ray sees other children inside, but his cold appearance leaves the children visibly frightened. The girl says those are her siblings. Her grandfather brought them from an orphanage. Their names are Molta and Jolfine. Ray asks if those children were brought there to learn magic. He says he doesn't see another reason, and the girl herself said she learned magic from her grandfather. Veronica is impressed by Ray's deductive ability. Either way, she takes the protagonist to meet her grandfather. When they arrive, she formally introduces Ray, and the young man finally meets the old man. Veronica's grandfather asks her to wait outside for a moment, as he wants to speak with Ray alone. As soon as they are alone, the old man thanks Ray for his help the other day. He says he should be the one protecting his granddaughter from danger, but in his current state, that's not possible. Ray takes the opportunity to closely observe the old man and notices that he has 4 internal rings, each with specific conditions. He thinks that feeling so many emotions at once is incredibly difficult, so he concludes that this isn't mana. Instead, its colors are etched into the vessel. The countless ripples and waves of emotion over the years have left their traces. The old man says he knows the protagonist has many things he would like to ask. Ray says he was looking for a mage. According to Veronica, the old man knows that Ray used magic with great skill, but doesn't know much else, so he assumes Ray must be from somewhere else. He says Ray seems to have a long story, and maybe finds it hard to talk about. So the old man suggests that they play a game, where the winner of each round can ask the loser a question. The way the protagonist reacts to this makes the old man think it's proof of his sharp senses. Then the old man asks if Ray is capable of sensing people's mana. The protagonist replies that he is, but he also thinks that he's not only able to sense, but also to see people's mana. The old man notices that Rei's atmosphere has completely changed and says that each magic uses a different element, and when elements meet, they can even create new ones. What lies between them now is the element of maintenance, the element necessary for magic to maintain homeostasis without being affected by external factors. And because of this homeostasis, it's also the most difficult to manipulate. Rei asks about the element beside it. With that, the old man realizes the boy can sense not just one, but two elements. The protagonist says that besides the gray, there's also a dark gray. He can clearly distinguish both shades. This leaves the old man truly impressed. He thinks there was no need to go through hundreds of orphanages, because the boy identified the elements of maintenance and continuation immediately, something a regular mage can't do in a lifetime. He attributes it to a cruelty of fate, since he doesn't have much time left to live and yet has found such talent. In turn, Rei takes the opportunity to ask the name of the element beside maintenance. The old man says it wouldn't be as fun to just give it away, so Rei will have to win the game to get the answer. He explains that it's quite simple. There is now a sphere composed of two different elements between them. Rei must try to pull the sphere toward himself, and when it reaches someone's hand, the sphere can be placed closer to Rei at the start for the sake of fairness. Rei thinks it would be hard to beat a mage far more skilled than him, but since the old man placed a handicap, it's not impossible, so he agrees to play. Then the game between them begins, and the protagonist quickly notices the difference in strength between them. Because the old man barely put in effort to grab the energy sphere, Rei is left stunned, witnessing an elderly man move that fast. In turn, the old man says he'll ask the first question. He asks how Rei learned about magic. The protagonist answers that he's self-taught, and the old man says the boy has managed to surprise him twice in the same day. Rei tries to ask a question, but the old man says he needs to win the game for that. So Rei agrees to play one more time. However, upon playing again with the old man, Rei has no chance of winning, because the old man doesn't hold back. He says the outcome of this competition depends solely on each person's ability to manage things. The protagonist thinks he's just giving away information about himself and not getting the answers he wanted. Therefore, he decides to test another method. Then the old man says they'll continue the game. Already aware of the old man's strength, Rei uses magic to try and throw off his concentration, believing that way he might win a round. The old man says he cheated, but Rei says no rule was stated against distracting your opponent. So the old man says he can ask whatever he wants. Then Rei asks, what is mana? He actually wants to know what the essence of magic is. In turn, the old man explains that mana is the most fundamental element from which all things in the world are made. You can't see it or touch it, but like lightning, fire, or hail, you can observe its movement through secondary phenomena. Furthermore, a very small number of humans are born with the sensory ability to perceive mana. However, being able to sense mana doesn't mean being able to use magic, since the talent to sense mana and to manipulate it are entirely different domains. Rei asks if talent means having the ability to manipulate mana. Even though that's a second question, the old man replies that the ability lies in separating the individual elements that make up a mana and combining them in the correct proportions. Usually, those who understand themselves better tend to have more talent as mages. In a way, magic is a discipline of inner exploration. Mana waves for those who are honest with themselves. Rei starts to better understand what the old man is saying, but for the next question, they need to play another round. The element of maintenance is considered the hardest to deal with. However, the old man realizes that Rei is learning to handle it, understanding its traits in real time. After the boy wins the round, he says he's ready for the next question. Rei says he'd like to know more about the energy rings that some mages have in their hearts. The old man says he must be referring to the circles that contain mana. Mana accumulates in the air automatically in the created rings. After a single refinement, the distribution of elements in this process will differ depending on the mage. Rei asks if the refinement process makes mana easier to use than the mana still in the air. The old man says yes, but there's also another important reason for the process. It might be fine to use airborne mana a few times, but if done constantly, it'll cause poisoning. Usually, the reaction appears immediately after a mage uses mana from the air. They might feel dizzy and drowsy, unable to stop laughing, or to hold back tears. Some people may even have lower tolerance to anger. Mana poisoning symptoms vary from person to person. Once those symptoms accumulate, they develop into a permanent mental illness. Rei wonders if mana and emotions can influence one another, and if using unrefined mana could make the user hysterical, because that would explain why he was free from mana poisoning. And until recently, he wasn't even able to feel emotions. Rei then says that someone who could use the mana in the air while being immune to mana poisoning would have a huge advantage. The old man says that's a unique idea, however, he's never seen such a person before. If someone like that existed, they would be incomparable to mages who only use refined mana for safety, since there is an infinite amount of mana in the air. Next, the old man asks if Rei has a dream, not the kind that happens when you sleep, but one that is a projection of the future. Rei says there is something he would like to do, and mentions that there's someone he wants to kill, and someone he wants to save. The old man says he's heard many people mention the first part, but it's the first time he agrees with the second. So he asks if the protagonist would like to learn magic from him. Rei wonders why a mage with 4 circles would want to teach a street orphan. He doesn't understand the old man's intentions and wonders if he wants something specific. The old man says he wants nothing from Rei, so the boy has the answer he was looking for. Thus, he agrees to become the mage's apprentice. This pleases the old man greatly. Next, he calls for Veronica and tells her to sit down as he has something to say. The old man says he took the children from the orphanage to pass on to them his legacy as a mage and that this is part of his knowledge, so he wants her to listen. He also says this is about the rainbow, and he knows Rei is searching for the phenomenon. The rainbow is a story passed down since ancient times. Even now, there are certainly many who wander the world in search of it. There are hundreds of theories about the rainbow, but they all converge on one point. The one who finds the rainbow can become a divine entity. Veronica doesn't know what divinity means, so her grandfather explains that they are all powerful beings who can make anything they want happen in this world. This makes Rei think that's why the monocled mage was also searching for the rainbow. The girl was about to clear up another doubt, until a rock is thrown and crashes through the bedroom window. Veronica is nearly struck by the stone, but the protagonist manages to catch the projectile before that happens, saving the girl from being hit by a rock once again. After being saved by Rei once more, the girl realizes she was nearly hurt. She also notices that the window glass shattered and wonders if wind magic was used to do it. The protagonist, in turn, tries to analyze the situation. He thinks he clearly gave the bullies a warning, but it seems they have no intention of backing off the harassment against the bookstore. The old man says Rei saved them again, and thanks him. He says he would treat his wounds if he could, but he's unable, so he asks Veronica to take care of it. So the girl takes Rei's hand and casts a healing spell. She says the wounds will heal soon, but she's bothered by having stones thrown at the shop again. Seeing her crying, Rei wonders if this is really something worth crying over. To be honest, he thinks the scars might actually be useful for his reputation. The old man tells Veronica to avoid using magic before forming a circle, since she used too much of the mana from the air. He also says it's been a month since these stone attacks started happening frequently, and he has a suspicion why. Some time ago, the old man received an offer to buy the shop, but refused, and since then, this has been happening. Rei asks if the old man has changed his mind. He says no, but it's becoming increasingly unbearable. It was half a year ago that the old man opened this bookstore. It was meant to train his disciples and finish the research project he had dedicated his whole life to. The children congratulated him for the accomplishment and were happy too. This made the old man feel satisfied with this life, because that way he could meet children and welcome those who needed books. But now Veronica is managing the bookstore in their home due to his illness. He knows that if he were to die, things would only get worse. There would be no easier target than a shop run only by children. Therefore, the conclusion he's come to is to sell the bookstore and look for a proper home for the children. But Veronica is completely against this idea. She says that this was her grandfather's childhood dream, and he can't give up on it. The old man thanks the girl for her concern, but says that things don't always go the way people want. Even so, Veronica doesn't agree with closing the store, and says she's not ready to see her grandfather fade away. Such words move the old man's heart, and he says he placed too heavy a burden on her. Rei observes all of this up close. Sometime later, he lets the old man rest, and while he sleeps, Veronica says her grandfather has what's called the eternal sleep disease, something quite rare. It started 2 months ago. His sleep periods are getting longer and longer until he eventually won't open his eyes again. He can no longer move and is only able to stay awake for 2 to 3 hours a day. So she says that Rei can come back the next day because her grandfather usually wakes up in the morning. She lends a raincoat to the protagonist and says she'll be waiting for his return the next day. However, this farewell tone reminds Rei of the last time he spoke with Peo. This makes him feel like he needs to say something because he doesn't like the sound of that farewell. Rei thinks about what the best words would be until he simply tells Veronica not to worry because they will see each other again. Upon hearing this, Veronica is surprised. She can't hold back her tears and thanks Rei for his words. As he leaves the shop, Rei wonders where the boys went. He knows the store is located in Jeffer's gang territory, and those boys are definitely part of his gang. Rei thinks the boys probably returned to their base because of the rain. He had hoped he wouldn't have to deal with Jeffer so soon, but apparently, he'll have to change his plans. However, he needs to see Philip first, because he's connected to everything happening in the city, so he must have some information that can help with this case. But in the middle of his run, the protagonist comes across a strange group. Looking closer, he realizes those boys are part of Kedrick's group and wonders what they're doing there. Rei hides in the shadows, watching everything. That way, he notices that Kedrick is inside the container. But he's not alone, because Philip is also there, being assaulted by him. Kedrick is quite angry with the boy, claiming that he's getting in the way of his plan. In the middle of their heated conversation, he hears noises coming from outside. Moments later, Rei kicks the door open. The noise Kedrick heard was his bodyguards getting beaten up. Upon seeing the protagonist, he shows a bit of surprise, as if he didn't know Rei had any business with Philip. His words are full of irony, as Kedrick points at Philip like he's proud of what he did to him. Kedrick says he's surprised that Ray has dealings with Philip. In turn, the protagonist wonders if the boy is unconscious. He thinks he has no obligation to be loyal to a future business partner, but Philip has helped him on several occasions. And that's enough for Ray, because he always pays his debts. That's his life rule. However, Kedrick says that Ray should be more patient because their duel is set for the next day, and he doesn't want to waste his strength fighting now. Ray observes the opponent's mana and notices that it has changed. Both his container and the mana in the rings have become larger and more defined than before, perhaps even stronger. Ray then says he's not there to fight, and asks what Kedrick wants with the boy. Kedrick says he should already know the answer, claiming that the brat is approaching others, talking about some weird business proposal. For Kedrick, the only proper response to such a proposal is a display of strength, because just looking at someone weaker makes him sick and disgusted. Then he tries to attack Philip again, but the protagonist doesn't let that happen. He blocks the attack, throwing the enemy back. Kedrick doesn't like being interrupted one bit. As soon as he regains his balance, he charges at Ray and tries to land a punch. The protagonist stops the punch with just his hand, leaving his opponent stunned, because Kedrick didn't expect that, and even says Ray shouldn't interfere in his business. Ray asks why Kedrick is doing this, but the opponent becomes furious. He backs away from the protagonist and says that just looking at the weak makes him sick, which is why he reacts this way. Kedrick says he hates weak people. He even despises them so much that it makes him sick. Ray, however, says that's no reason to hurt others, but his opponent completely disagrees. He says weak people are destined to stay that way. He also says he'll show why he doesn't like intruders in his territory. With that, he'll make Ray an example for everyone. Kedrick believes that by using his ring, he could easily finish off the protagonist. But doing that now would be no fun, since no one would be watching. Ray, on the other hand, says there's a method that works best when it comes to sending a message. Judging by the enemy's words, it seems like he's going to kill Philip. But if that happens with no one watching, it wouldn't make any sense. Ray says that if it were him, he'd do it in front of everyone. That way, it would be much more effective. With that, the protagonist planted an idea in his enemy's head. Kedrick heard exactly what he wanted. He says that if he's going to take Philip down, there's no better day to do it than during the duel against Ray, when everyone will be present. But he says the boy might end up running away. However, Ray says he'll make sure that doesn't happen. So the enemy agrees. Besides, he says that with Ray's defeat, there will be no way Philip can run from him. He also says that if Ray doesn't keep his word and helps the boy escape, he'll destroy this entire place. After that, he leaves, and Ray immediately worries about the boy, but he realizes that Philip can barely speak since he's seriously injured. Ray sees that the boy's condition is worse than he thought, so he goes looking for help. After that, he knocks on the door of Philip's warehouse. A guy who was standing guard gets startled by someone knocking at that hour. However, as soon as he opens the door, he sees Philip being carried in, badly hurt. Ray, in turn, asks for help. Outside the warehouse, it's raining heavily. Ray waits while Philip is treated, until he hears someone approaching. One of the guys says Philip is awake and can receive visitors. Already in the room, Philip says the boys told him Ray carried him there, and thanks him for the help. Ray says that what matters to him is that Philip is safe. He also asks why Kedrick attacked him. Philip says that in order to send kids from his hotel to stores in certain areas, he was planning to scout ahead and ended up running into Kedrick. He also says that sometimes you have to overcome your fears. Obviously, there's no better time than when there's a chance for profit. Ray notices that the colors inside Philip are more pink than golden, and wonders if the reason behind all this is really about making money. He says Philip and Kedrick have known each other for a while. Philip says he knew Ray would figure that out sooner or later, and that he didn't hide it out of malice or anything like that. In fact, he reveals they were childhood friends. When they were boys, the two were always together, and they did what they had to do to survive, until the day Philip opened his hotel. He saw it as a chance to grow, but his friend didn't see it the same way. Kedrick was very upset with the situation, and asked how long they'd have to keep living in hiding. That's when Philip realized his friend was never satisfied. To be more precise, he described Kedrick as someone who was always angry, and after a while decided to channel that anger into training his body. After some time running the hotel, Kedrick left the place and followed his own path. It didn't take long before he started fighting in the streets like a villain. His training wasn't enough, since he was always losing. The physical gap between him and the guys who ran the streets was too big. However, the protagonist says that the situation has changed. Philip says he's right because Kedrick managed to turn things around and became the strongest in the streets. Ray asks if Kedrick always had that ring. Philip says no, he only started using that item recently, and thinks it showed up sometime after Kedrick became leader of his own gang. He also says that Kedrick wasn't always so violent, but after he left the hotel, he became a different person. The protagonist begins to draw out the situation within his soul. He thinks that Kedrick might have met Walter while he was on the streets, and somehow, the connection between them led to this outcome, with Walter gifting the boy a magical ring. That would be the only way a street kid could possess such power. Philip says that he and his friend drifted apart after the friend took control of the streets. All attempts to reach out afterward were unsuccessful, and sometimes Kedrick would look at him with contempt, besides the fact that he even tried to eliminate him before. Ray analyzes the boy's mana and realizes he feels sadness when talking about this story, so he asks if Philip wants to try talking to Kedrick one more time. The boy doesn't quite understand what Ray means. Ray says that they're childhood friends, so they should try to make peace. Philip says he does want that. Apparently, he's being sincere, and Ray notices it. So he tells the boy to come with him on the day of the battle against Kedrick, because once it's over, he'll have the opportunity to talk to his old friend. However, Philip claims that it's impossible. Only those affiliated with the 3 major gangs are allowed to enter. Someone like him doesn't have permission to go in, but Ray tells him not to worry about that, because he's already worked everything out with Kedrick. Philip says he can't believe how amazing Ray is and thanks him. The protagonist says there's no need for that. But he does mention that there's one condition if he loses the fight, because the agreement was that if that happens, both he and the boy will perish before all the gangs. That sounds quite terrifying to Philip. In short, Ray says that if he loses, both of them are done for, and Kedrick probably won't make it quick. Philip doesn't want to show fear, but he can't hide his emotions. Ray then reassures him, saying he's not going to lose, and he won't let Kedrick hurt him again. The protagonist thinks that if Philip ends up owing him for this, he'll have no choice but to help him in the future. His words were enough to convince the boy. Ray praises his decision, and says there's something he'll need from Philip when they're there. That will be the second condition. After hearing the protagonist's request, Philip says he must be joking, but Ray says it was the boy himself who said he would overcome his fear if there were a profit opportunity. Ray claims this is a business proposal, and it's a chance to make a lot of money. Philip thinks he's not wrong, but the duel's spectators are from the 3 major gangs. The leaders of the other gangs, Jeffer and Lotson, will certainly show up too. As such, there will be a huge amount of capital gathered in one place, unlike anything else. However, even if things go according to Ray's plan, Philip doesn't think the 2 of them will make it out in one piece. Still, Ray says he only needs to deal with Kedrick. He also says there could be 100 of them, and it still wouldn't be a problem. Their expressions reflect opposite emotions. In any case, Philip grabs a pen and paper and hands them to Ray right after, saying it'll be an honor to work alongside him, so it's best to establish a partnership contract already. 2 days after that meeting, the time has come for the duel between Ray and Kedrick. At the appointed place, members from all the gangs are present, and some are extremely excited, including the leaders of the groups. The opponents stare each other down before it starts. On one side, the crowd sees the hunter, someone who came from Sector 50 and already aims for the top, arrogant enough to think he can win. On the other side, they see Kedrick, the strongest gang leader in the city, and many already assume his victory is guaranteed. Some even place large bets on Kedrick's certain victory. However, others, a bit smarter, realize that Kedrick's defeat would generate much more profit, because most people are betting on his win, so they're rooting for this so-called hunter to win the fight. Speaking of him, the protagonist takes a moment to analyze the situation. Kedrick asks why Philip isn't with Ray. After all, he promised he would bring him. The protagonist tells the opponent not to worry, because Philip will arrive at the right time. Speaking of him, the boy arrives in a wheelchair, being helped by one of his own. From inside the ring, Kedrick notices this, and from afar, he spots Philip's presence. Some ask if the hotel guy intends to interfere in the fight, but Kedrick orders everyone to stop making noise, claiming that Philip is there because he was invited by him, and besides that, he promises to deliver a show to the public after the battle ends. Kedrick asks if Philip is ready for this. Without fear, Philip says yes. Ray and Philip have already come up with a plan. Now the boy knows he must trust him for everything to go right. Kedrick says everyone has arrived, so they can begin. But Philip says not yet, because he wants to place a bet too. To everyone's surprise, the boy says he brought a total of 2,240,000 in local currency. He shows his briefcase full of money, claiming that he bet everything on Ray's victory. A flashback reveals that this was what they agreed on beforehand. Philip said at the time that he would bet all the money he had on Ray's win, but he knew it would cause some chaos. Back to the present, the betting crowd goes wild with the revelation. Kedrick says this must have been Ray's idea. Either way, he agrees to go on, believing that besides winning the fight, he'll also walk away with a good amount of money. Then the bell rings, announcing the start of the match. Wasting no time, Kedrick goes on the offensive, but when he throws a punch, Ray dodges it. The protagonist notices that the opponent is much faster than in their last fight. However, his movements are still nothing compared to his own. Ray thinks he'll disable the opponent's arm with just one move, but Kedrick notices it in time, so he dodges the blow and backs away from Ray. The enemy says the protagonist is finally fighting for real. He also says Ray is a funny guy. That makes him want to fight even more intensely. This way, Ray realizes that indeed, his opponent has become more cunning. The protagonist doesn't stay purely on the defensive. He dodges the enemy's attacks, but also lands blows whenever there's an opening. However, Kedrick also dodges the attacks. The fight is more thrilling than some expected, including Philip, who while watching thinks there's no turning back now. He also notices that because of the fight, a large amount of fire is spreading. Kedrick fights with the intent to kill his opponent, and spares no effort, striking harder and harder. Rei, on the other hand, thinks more strategically. As soon as he sees an opening in the enemy's guard, he takes the chance to grab and immobilize him. Kedrick doesn't like that one bit. Even so, Rei tries to bring him to the ground. The enemy says this isn't over. He tries any way he can to stay on his feet, but his strength isn't enough to prevent being thrown far away. Something that, to the audience, was incredibly impressive. But the only one truly concerned is Philip. To everyone else, they can only think the hunter is stronger than they imagined. Plus, they see Kedrick lying on the ground and already consider that he might actually lose. Upon hearing some of those comments, Kedrick gets up furiously. His entire body exudes an extremely malicious aura, and he claims there's no chance he'll lose. Full of rage, he attacks Rei. Once again, he tries to land a punch on the protagonist, which nearly hits him squarely. Rei realizes the opponent's attacks are getting stronger. While defending against the punches, he thinks things won't end well if it keeps going like this, so he starts trying to come up with a strategy, until he remembers when Niles said that body weight is a decisive factor in a fight. Kedrick increasingly shows his strength with each punch, and notices that Rei is struggling to block them. The protagonist thinks he's not able to completely block these attacks. However, he remembers that Niles taught a way to compensate for weight differences. He taught Rei to perform a joint lock. Remembering that, Rei decides to use the tactic. Then he leaps over the opponent, grabs his neck, and immobilizes him. Kedrick is far from pleased with this, and since he can't escape the hold, he resorts to verbal insult until he gets extremely agitated and his hatred fuels his magic ring. This gives him an energy boost, allowing him to get back up. But Rei realizes that this is only going to destroy the enemy's body. Right after, Kedrick begins to feel the side effects. His body reacts negatively, and he drops to the ground. In a way, he lost to the very thing that gave him strength. Rei takes advantage of the situation to remove the ring from the enemy's hand. The crowd, for their part, is confused by how the fight ended. They were expecting a more exciting finish, but the fact that Kedrick doesn't get up from the ground is enough to determine his defeat. Rei thinks Kedrick won't be able to move for a few weeks. Philip takes the opportunity to approach the arena. Meanwhile, the protagonist grabs the betting money before anyone tries anything funny. But to everyone's surprise, Kedrick gets up and says the fight isn't over yet. He also says he never loses a fight and won't give up. However, someone in the crowd hits him with an object. They're all furious for losing their bets and start throwing things at the loser. Kedrick receives a surge of hatred he's not used to. Angrily, he tells them not to look at him like that. Then he grabs a flaming barrel. Realizing his intentions, Philip tries to stop him, but Kedrick ends up throwing the object toward the crowd, causing people to run and setting the chairs on fire. This in a way makes him happy, as Kedrick claims he'll make them all burn. As the flames begin to spread, the entire audience starts to flee, and in the middle of the ring, Kedrick laughs at the situation. He boasts about what he's done, because after losing the fight, his joy became causing chaos around him. But his joy doesn't last long, as Kedrick falls to the ground again. The protagonist realizes the energy in the enemy's body has run out, and now he won't be getting back up. Rei thinks that if he tries to save the enemy, he and Philip will also be in danger. But when he turns his gaze, he sees that Philip has already gotten up from the wheelchair and has gone over to his childhood friend. Philip didn't even consider leaving without Kedrick. He tries to carry his friend out, but he struggles quite a bit. Rei then tells him to try putting Kedrick in the wheelchair. Surprised, Philip thought Rei had already left the place, but is happy that he waited. The protagonist thinks about how Philip almost died at Kedrick's hands 2 days ago and wonders why he's still trying to help him. Philip tries to put Kedrick in the chair, but it's difficult. So he asks Rei for help. Even if reluctantly, Rei helps him. After placing him in the chair, Philip tells Rei to get out of there with Kedrick. Rei asks what Philip is going to do. Philip says that getting 2 people out of there will be hard for Rei, so he claims he'll be fine. But this triggers a memory in Rei of the last words from his friend Niles, so he doesn't feel comfortable leaving Philip there and walking away, and asks why the boy is willing to sacrifice himself for Kedrick. Philip replies that he didn't think too much about it, he just decided that's how it would be. Rei doesn't quite understand the answer, since Philip is always calculating, and the fact that he says he didn't think it through sounds odd. However, Philip states that Kedrick is his friend, and he just wants to protect him, no matter what. The protagonist still finds it strange. He even remembers his old friends and wonders why people risk themselves to save their loved ones. In Rei's mind, several memories from his past come up, of how he was treated by the children he used to help, and also the conversations he had with Niles about being an older brother. Even Pale appears in the protagonist's mind as someone he needed to protect. But even so, it was Pale who felt responsible for protecting Rei, claiming that the reason was because they were friends. With that, Rei wonders if he had reached out just a little further. Would he have been able to grasp the true meaning of friendship? But he concludes that no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't be able to understand something like that, and that bothers him. Back to the present moment, he says it's too late to escape because the flames have spread too much, so the only option is to stay where they are, because he thinks the fire won't reach the center of the arena. Philip argues that fire isn't the only problem. They could die from inhaling the smoke, but Rei says he'll take care of that. He rips off his shirt and channels his mana into it. The boy is stunned as he witnesses the use of magic, but Ray tells him not to be and to cover his face with the piece of fabric. Thinking it over, Philip concludes that this is why Ray was investigating mages and asked for his help with that. He never even considered that the use of magic was real before, but now he's already thinking about how it could help them escape. Sensing the boy's intentions, Ray says there's a limit to the use of his powers, and that later on, they can clarify a few things about it. But for now, he wants to know something else, and asks Philip, what is the meaning of friendship? Philip asks if he really wants to talk about that now. Besides, he says everyone knows what friendship is. Ray says that his idea of friendship might be different from others, so Philip wants to hear his take on it. The protagonist says that to him, a friend is someone he's known for some time. In a way, Philip is surprised by the answer. He thinks that the strange feeling he had when working with Ray the first time makes more sense now. The boy says that Ray isn't completely wrong about friendship, but the true meaning goes much deeper. He also says that to him, a friend is someone who would help you expecting nothing in return, and someone you would help as well. That is the true meaning of friendship. The protagonist says that such a feeling is what puts Philip in danger, like now. He says he knows that, but even so, his feelings won't let him leave this place and let Kedrick die. Philip feels he owes that to his friend, precisely because of who he is. Ray understands the desire to protect someone. Right after, the ceiling of the place starts to collapse and is about to fall on top of them. The protagonist looks at it and thinks it's too late to run, imagining this will be his end. Unlike when he faced the golem, all Ray could think about was defeating the enemy. He still blames himself for not being able to bring those children back after they died. After all, they were all he had. But Ray doesn't want this to be his end. He channels his powers, thinking that he needs to stay alive, because there is still a chance to make things right. That way, Ray conjures a force field, protecting himself and the boys. His sense of duty and need to protect overwhelms him more than ever. Philip, in turn, is once again surprised by these powers. He thought Ray wouldn't be able to use his powers again so soon. Ray tells the boy not to get too worked up. He notices a wound on Philip's leg, to the boy's own surprise, and uses his powers to heal it. Philip thanks the protagonist for the help, and says he'll never forget what he's doing. Ray says he doesn't need to thank him that much. He thinks there are many things he'll need both of them to do for him from now on, and he also wants to test the limits of white mana. Philip asks what they're going to do now. The protagonist replies that they're simply going to leave. Soon, Philip asks if he's still able to use magic. Ray says no, for now they can only keep waiting, while he maintains his force field. Kedrick remains unconscious in the wheelchair. The fire outside grows weaker and weaker, as there's nothing left to burn. Meanwhile, the group members become upset, because this place was home to some of them, until others appear, claiming it's all Kedrick's fault. He was the one who set everything on fire and left several people homeless. These were Jeffer and Lotson, who, after provoking a few boys, leave and don't stay around. One of the boys cries because he thinks he left Philip behind. He feels guilty, thinking his friend died in the fire. Because of that, he kneels at the entrance of the place, until, amidst all that smoke, the boy seemingly sees something approaching. He sees someone walking out, and calls the others' attention. Ray comes out from the smoke, and the boys are stunned, as they didn't believe he was still alive. The hunter, whom they recognized, is not alone. Philip and Kedrick are with him. Upon seeing the remnants of Kedrick's gang, Ray says that if they're looking for a fight, he's willing to demonstrate his strength once again. But a fight is not what the boys want. They kneel before Ray, as they don't even dare challenge him anymore. Now that their leader has been defeated, Ray is the new leader. Sometime later, they head toward Philip's warehouse. Some boys spot someone arriving, until they realize it's Philip himself, who of course doesn't return home alone. Ray tells the former members of Kedrick's gang to wait outside and not to move until they receive orders. But before going in, Philip asks for a moment. He looks at the crowd of boys and asks if Chris isn't coming in with him. Chris says he abandoned Philip, so he doesn't feel worthy of returning. Philip says it's okay. He holds no grudges against Chris. He also says that inside is his home, and Chris will always be welcome. Crying, Chris hugs him and apologizes for what happened. He asks Ray what he thinks. The protagonist believes that Philip is the owner of the place, not him. Either way, they reconcile, and both enter the warehouse. Seeing this, the boys immediately think the hunter has taken over Philip's hotel too, which only boosts his reputation even more. Philip notices the way the others perceive it. Either way, now he needs to go inside. After that, the concerned residents ask if Philip is okay. They also see that Kedrick is with him and are confused. Philip tells them to take him to the infirmary, and that he'll explain everything later. However, Ray takes on that responsibility and carries Kedrick himself, carrying him toward the infirmary. After the entire bandaging process, Philip talks a bit with the protagonist. He wants to know what really happened in the arena. Ray simply says he used magic. The boy says he saw the magic, but still, it's hard to believe. More importantly than that, Ray wants to talk about finances. Philip says they earned a total of 4,240,000 shillings from the bets. Ray gives Philip his share, but says he has a request to make. The base that was burned, Ray would like his partner to find a replacement to move into. Philip says that if it's about setting up a new base, he can definitely do that, and also acquire furniture and other things as well. However, he says he can't keep that money. He claims the split is wrong, that Ray should take much more than he did. After all, everything that happened was thanks to Ray, so he gives the money back, but the protagonist doesn't accept the return. He says he doesn't understand. Ray is confused as he observes the boy's internal mana, and says maybe Philip is worried about him. Philip thinks that Ray is officially the strongest person in the whole sector, and his only concern is whether Ray might become an enemy instead of a business partner. The boy claims he's not worried about Ray, he just thinks splitting things this way is the right thing to do. Even so, Ray doesn't understand, and the two spend a while arguing about it. Sometime later, they finally come to an understanding, until one of the hotel boys shows up and says they've got a problem. Jeffer and Lotson have appeared with their subordinates. Philip believes they didn't bring the entire gang. They left lookouts in various spots, probably because they heard they brought all the betting money to the hotel. Ray says they'd have to face them sooner or later anyway. Philip asks if it wouldn't be better to challenge them to a duel. The protagonist tells Philip to remember what they discussed earlier, and says the boy will receive his dividends soon. After that, they head outside. Jeffer sees the two and says he thought they had died in all that fire. Lotson says it makes no sense they survived and asks how they managed it. They say many people were hurt in the fire, and accuse the partners of planning it from the start to win all the money. Lotson gets straight to the point. He tells them to hand over all the betting money. If they do that, he'll leave quietly that night. Philip wonders just how bold the guy has to be to say something like that. In turn, Ray says he agrees with the deal. He says he'll hand over everything. With that, he tosses a single coin toward the enemy. The coin falls at Lotson's feet. Ray says that's all he'll give. Such provocation leaves the enemy furious. Ray says if they want money, they'll have to take it by force, because that's the rule of the streets. The protagonist takes a fighting stance and tells Philip to return to the hotel. Soon after, the enemies charge. Ray thinks that, just like Philip said, his body isn't in great condition right now, but that doesn't matter now, because the protagonist has the ring he took from Kedrick, and he's going to use it now. With that, his strength increases, allowing Ray to block attacks from both enemies. Not only that, but his defensive power is so strong that he breaks the weapons the enemies are using against him. After that, Ray goes on the offensive. He has no mercy for the opponents, since they were the ones who picked the fight. The enemy gang members are frightened, and the protagonist asks if they're just going to stand there or if they're going to fight. Irritated, they band together, claiming the protagonist can't win if they all attack at once. They gang up on Ray, but are quickly countered. Ray shows off his enhanced strength, defeating multiple opponents at once. While some get beaten by the protagonist, others stay back, just watching. These are remnants of Kedrick's gang. One of them says Ray's way of doing things is pretty cool, but the other doesn't like it much. He still shows loyalty to his former boss. The first boy says the rest have no reason to stay loyal to a defeated leader, especially one who always mistreated his own men. That's why the hunter is superior. Not only is he stronger, but he also has the potential to become a better leader. In the midst of all that, one of the enemy boys says they should stop attacking the protagonist and scatter. Now they should invade the hotel. Ray gets worried, as he didn't think this would happen. The boys stop fighting him and rush to the hotel entrance. With that, the protagonist gathers his strength and lets out a powerful shout. Right after, he orders the boys from his gang to stop the enemies. They're startled by the shout, because even in that, Ray showed strength. The order was heard by everyone, so they start acting just as the hunter commanded. Desperate, the enemies try to reason with them, but Ray's allied boys don't want to talk. The enemies don't understand why this is happening, but it doesn't calm things down. It only makes the fight worse. From inside, Philip watches everything. He tells his people that Kedrick's gang members are helping. However, their problems are only just beginning, because the opponents appear with an iron bar, intending to use it to break the door down. They found a clear path, and don't miss the chance to use what they got. Philip is desperate because of this, and so are the boys who are helping out. The enemies think they got the advantage, until, to their despair, Ray appears and stops them from advancing. Using his powers, he halts the attack with the iron bar. The enemies are even more shocked when they realize that Ray, who was behind them, suddenly appeared in front. Even so, they don't give up and try to advance. Ray increases his strength, throwing off the enemy's balance. He grabs the iron bar by himself and pushes all the enemies back. His allies are amazed to see their new boss in action. Even Philip, who asks how this is possible. Ray, for his part, drops the iron bar and faces the enemies up close. With a very intimidating gaze, without saying a single word, he makes the enemies run. Ray thinks he has reached his limit and gets ready to remove the ring, but he's surprised next, because the allied boys start praising his performance and worship him as their new leader. Ray looks into them, and this is the first time he sees this color of mana. He doesn't know what emotion it is, and feels strange. Right after, Philip tries to reach Ray, but as soon as he gets close to his ally, The protagonist's body feels the full impact of the ring's power. With that, he collapses unconscious, and Philip calls for help for Ray. Ray wakes up in another place. He doesn't know exactly where he is. He quickly thinks it must be a dream, even though he rarely dreams. Then he sees a mountain of trash and decides to climb to the top. Ray manages to reach the top of the pile, and from there he has a privileged view. The protagonist stares at the sun. Seeing a white light in a black and white world gives him a strange sense of certainty. Ray stretches his hand out, trying to reach the light, almost reaching it, even though it appears far away. He thinks that this light was originally white, but as he reaches it, Ray sees a crack, and from it emerges another light, this time a colorful one. The colored energy spreads in every direction. It's so abundant that it leaves the protagonist amazed. Ray admires all those forms and colors, in a way he had never experienced before. Right after he wakes up, Ray realizes he's in the hotel's infirmary, so he concludes he was really dreaming. Soon after, the hotel guards notice that he's awake and ask if the protagonist is hungry. If so, they can prepare him a banquet. Ray says he doesn't need that. He actually wants to know how long he's been unconscious. The boys reveal that he was out for about a whole day. With that, he gets out of bed and says he's going to take a walk. The protagonist sees the boys working in the hotel. He notices that Philip took the remnants of Kedrick's gang and put them to work. The remnants are willing to work. One of them says he's pretty strong and offers to help carry some boxes. The hotel's regular staff feel a bit awkward about it, so they assign the newcomers some tasks. From a distance, Ray analyzes their mana and sees that the emotion the remnants carry is guilt. Ray decides to go down there. Soon, the boys surround him, as the hunter's fame has already spread among them. The protagonist isn't used to being praised and doesn't know how to react to it. Until, in the middle of all that, he notices something different. Someone sees a guy running and yells to stop him. Kedrick leaves the infirmary with a scalpel, and his thirst for revenge against Ray drives him to try and do it right then and there, in front of everyone. Ray, however, is not afraid and says he'll take care of it. Kedrick becomes furious with rage and charges toward the protagonist. However, Ray shows no concern. On the contrary, he lets the opponent get closer, because he knew Kedrick wouldn't go through with it. The opponent's hands tremble from nervousness. The protagonist asks what's wrong. He grabs Kedrick's hands and brings the scalpel close to his neck, saying that Kedrick can cut him if he wants. But the protagonist himself knows the opponent won't do it because he can see that in his mana. Frustrated for not being able to go through with it, Kedrick tries to cut himself, but obviously Ray wouldn't let that happen, so he takes the scalpel from the opponent's hands, preventing him from doing something foolish. Ray says that's enough. He also tells Kedrick to follow him, because he wants to talk to him about something important. Later, Philip apologizes for what happened, as it was due to his carelessness that Kedrick escaped from the infirmary. Ray says it's okay, after all, no one got hurt. Philip heard everything about the situation, and asks if Kedrick truly intends to give up on life. His old friend confirms that he does. He says that after losing the duel, no one will respect him anymore, and they'll go back to laughing and mocking him like before. Philip claims that's not true. This irritates Kedrick, and he asks what Philip's problem is, saying that he doesn't really know him. The protagonist analyzes Kedrick's mana and realizes he's feeling genuine anger. Earlier, he had shown a fragment he found at Walter's house to Veronica. She revealed that although it has its benefits, using it has limits. The fact that one can't fully refine a magic ring presents a risk of mana addiction. Kedrick laments having been saved, but Philip says that they're friends, and he couldn't just let him die. However, Kedrick is surprised to hear that, because he betrayed Philip and even tried to eliminate him with his own hands. Besides, he believes Philip replaced him with his hotel and new friends. But Philip believes his friend had his reasons and wouldn't have done it without a good cause. Analyzing Kedrick, the protagonist notices that his container has no red mana and wonders if he's just pretending to be angry. Philip tries to reach his old friend, telling him not to forget the moment they shared together. But Kedrick doesn't show any interest in that. The boy tries to get Kedrick to say what he's been doing all this time, but his old friend doesn't want to talk about it. Even so, Philip insists on showing his concern, and asks Kedrick to accept him as a friend again. Kedrick tries to hide his true feelings. He thinks that he's been living all this time without any consideration for Philip, and he also treated him very badly in their last encounter. So he doesn't understand why, even after all that, Philip continues to call him a friend. Thinking about all of this makes Kedrick emotional, and he also takes the opportunity to apologize. He walks up to his old friend and breaks down on his shoulder. Kedrick apologizes for everything that happened, claiming his anger only made things worse, but now he regrets it. He reveals that he worked in different gangs and streets to run away from the hotel, but in the end, he ended up coming back to the place he never should have left. His main reason was to become stronger by following his own path. That's why he trained every day, because he didn't want to be beaten up by the other gangs anymore. At a certain point in his journey, Kedrick thought an opportunity had finally come his way. However, it didn't take long for him to realize it was a trap. He considered going back to the hotel, but shame stopped him from facing Philip. That's why he hated people who didn't acknowledge their own actions, because he had done that himself in the past. Kedrick promised himself that he would be different from the others until a mysterious man appeared in his life. The boy didn't know it, but he had been approached by Walter, who offered him a proposal for change. Realizing what he had done, he blames himself. But at the time, the opportunity offered was the only thing he could cling to, because the man gave him a ring. The item was far from ordinary, as the stranger promised that with it, the boy could open any door he wanted, and even taught him how to use it once the proposal was accepted. Walter told him to make sure he never removed the ring, because once he wore it, taking it off would be a huge problem. He also encouraged the boy to form a group with 66 members. Once he achieved that, he would receive a great reward. Kedrick couldn't refuse, because that would make his dream of having his own group come true. Ray cuts the talk short and says that the reason Kedrick got stronger wasn't because he was cured of an illness. The real reason is magic, since the ring he received contains magic that strengthens the body. Kedrick sees the ring in Ray's hand and wants it back. However, he is stunned by what happens next. The protagonist gives a demonstration and explains that there is something called mana, which is used to create incredible things, like the flame he uses as an example. Upon seeing it, Kedrick is impressed, and he is also shocked to realize that all his strength this whole time was actually just magic. He feels sad knowing that he was never truly strong, since it was all because of the ring and not himself. But Ray says there's no need to go back. He states that Kedrick doesn't need to be who he was before. He just needs to do exactly as he's told. And in return, Ray promises he'll be even better than he was with the ring. Kedrick thanks the protagonist for the support. Philip asks if he's really going to appoint Kedrick as lieutenant, and if he's truly going to leave the gang's leadership to him too. Ray says yes, because he's not going to stay there forever, and once his goal is completed, he'll leave. He promised to train Kedrick and make him stronger, to the point he won't need the ring, saying that with the right technique, he could become someone completely different. Philip thanks Ray for what he's doing for his friend. He also says that reconciling with Kedrick was an incredibly insightful decision for both of them. Suppressing others by force isn't a bad idea, but it's also not the best option. It can create resentment and provoke revenge. Ray thinks he's never had to deal with that in the past, and wonders if such incidents happen due to a lack of instilled fear. Personally, he believes that oppressing others by force is the best option. Once fear is instilled in them, they can't think of anything else. However, Philip says that with that, Ray won't be able to earn true loyalty through strength alone. Proper rewards would teach Kedrick better how to fight. Ray thinks he can't feel empathy for Kedrick, but he also can't completely ignore him. Either way, he believes Philip knows how to deal with people. The protagonist goes to the boys and says they found another hideout and will be staying at the hotel, but if they cause any trouble for the children there, he will personally punish them. In addition, from now on, he says that Kedrick will be the gang's lieutenant. Most of the orders will come through him, and Ray will use him as his spokesperson. The boys think that yesterday's incident ended well. Kedrick has serious anger issues. It seems like he was humbled and learned a lesson. Ray thinks about what Philip said, that giving proper rewards is the way to gain people's true loyalty. So he says he'll distribute the money from the duel bets, because he earned enough for everyone to enjoy. Philip shows up and says they still need to settle things with Jeffer and Lotson. After the invasion, both of them ended up as prisoners. The protagonist goes to them and asks if they know about Veronica's shop. Lotson refuses to cooperate, but Ray gives just the right kind of encouragement. He says the enemies still haven't realized the situation they're in. Desperate, Lotson tries to offer money, but ends up getting slapped again. Ray says that's not the point, so he turns to Jeffer. Before even being pressured, Jeffer says he knows what the protagonist is talking about and admits that he was hired to scare the shop owners. Then the protagonist asks who hired him. He reveals that it was Fred, the owner of the general store on 3rd Street. Ray gets the answer he needed, but he doesn't let the villain get away without punishment. He delivers a good closed fist massage, so the guy never tries something like that again. Philip watches this from a distance and realizes this is Ray's true nature. By showing how he handled Jeffer and Lotson, he'll dispel the resentment built up by the hotel residents. It also serves as a good example for the observers from Kedrick's gang. If this is a calculated move, then it's quite cold and effective. Then Ray says he'll give the two another task. He tells them to use every available means to bring that general store to bankruptcy, and they must do it carefully, causing the least possible damage to themselves, because otherwise, he'll hunt them to the edge of the sector. Such a threat leaves the two even more intimidated. After that, the two villains are dragged outside, as they can't even walk on their own. Inside, a real banquet is being prepared for everyone, but they don't see the protagonist. Ray stays outside and doesn't join the party, and takes the opportunity to reflect on the recent events. The fact that someone helped him expecting nothing in return, and someone he would help in return, according to Philip, that is a friend. Ray thinks that he just called someone he's known for a while a friend. So people who truly care about each other are friends. Those kids were the only ones he truly felt concern for. The protagonist would also like to call Niles a friend, even though the man was over 20 years older than him, and he wonders if he'll ever find friends again. He's sure it'll be difficult, because he's different from others, given his lack of emotions. The only people he ever faced honestly, without prejudice, were Niles and the kids from under the viaduct. He thinks he'll never find anyone who truly understands him again. Philip shows up and says it's nice to be away from the noise and relax in the silence. He offers cocoa to Rei, thinking he might like sweet things. The protagonist remembers that he used to eat chocolate or sweets on purpose to give himself energy, so that's probably why Philip thinks he likes sweets. Speaking of Philip, he sits next to the protagonist. Rei tries the hot chocolate and is amazed. Philip was expecting exactly that reaction. The drink is warm, and Rei enjoys it, because it's so warm that he could forget that emptiness, even if only for a brief moment. Sometime later, Philip says he's heading north. He heard there are many abandoned factories there. Rei also leaves the hotel. As he walks through the streets, his reputation precedes him, and some street kids fear his presence. The protagonist heads to the bookstore. As soon as he steps through the door, Veronica runs to meet him. She says she was worried because Rei hadn't shown up for several days. She also says she and her grandfather were waiting. The girl asks if the protagonist got into a fight and if he's hurt. Rei says he's fine. Veronica says there's no way he's fine when he looks that injured. In turn, Rei sees her mana and thinks it looks like a soft little sun. He thinks it wasn't like that last time and wonders why he's so worried now. The girl tells him to wait because she'll use her mana to heal him. The protagonist says he already performed first aid, so it's fine. In fact, he reminds her that she herself warned him using atmospheric mana could cause addiction. Veronica says Rei looked hurt, so she didn't even think about that. She also blushes, since Rei showed concern for her. Either way, the protagonist says he's there to see her grandfather. By the way, he asks if Veronica sees him as a friend. The girl is startled by the sudden question, but confirms she sees him as a friend. Rei is curious to know what each person's criteria for friendship are, and wonders if someone is worried about a friend. Meanwhile, Veronica thinks about Rei's question. She imagines that, up until now, Rei was her savior, and their sense of connection was because of magic. Besides, it hasn't been very long since they met. Regardless, she confirms that the two of them are friends. The protagonist, in the coldest way possible, says he already knew that, and now he needs to see her grandfather, until Veronica tells him to wait, and asks if Rei sees her as a friend. She builds up a bit of expectation for the answer. The protagonist looks at the girl attentively, and simply says no. Immediately, the girl becomes deeply irritated. She lets out a shriek so loud it could be heard from outside. After composing herself, she tells Rei to go in first, because now she needs to feed her siblings. Without understanding anything, the protagonist wonders why the girl screamed out of nowhere. Either way, he enters the room, and the old man says it's been a while since he saw him. He also says people are supposed to sleep less with age, but he's been sleeping even more, and at this rate, he'll be sleeping the whole day away. Rei says he heard the old man was sick, and asks if he really will pass away soon. He replies that he probably has at most half a year left. Therefore, he wants to start magic lessons with Rei right away. The protagonist agrees, but first he has a question. He shows the ring he got from Kedrick and asks what it is. The old man takes the item in his hand, immediately recognizing it as a magic stone. He says that apparently amplification and strengthening are mixed together. There's a spell cast on it. Once its conditions are met, muscular strength and reflex nerves will be enhanced. There's also exploration-type magic mixed in. Normally, the more you use a charged stone, the more it deteriorates until it becomes nothing more than an empty shell. However, this charged stone is different. It's built in such a way that it consumes the user's vitality to repair itself. The ring's energy source is mana, and human life force is a type of mana, just in a different form. However, this magic isn't something just anyone could inscribe, and the old man asks where the protagonist found something so dangerous. Rei says he became the leader of a gang of kids, and the previous leader had received the ring from a man who claimed to be an officer from the Merc Red organization. The old man is shocked to hear that name. He doesn't believe it's possible. They are the most influential and dangerous underground organization, Merc Red. They sell firearms and drugs, and even traffic people. There's nothing they're not involved in. They have far fewer members than other large organizations and are also much more secretive. However, the reason why they are so dangerous is something entirely different. It's because all their members are mages. But they're not ordinary mages. The Crimson Gem is the symbol of a red mercenary member. The charged stone they always carry with them shows their complete disregard for mana addiction. Rei says the old man is incredibly well informed about them and wonders if he's investigated them directly before. The old man once said he spent his youth chasing the rainbow. That story is well known among those who seek the rainbow. They even say the red merc possesses a piece of the rainbow. That's something that shocks the protagonist when he hears it. That story is well known among those who seek the rainbow. They say Merc Red possesses a piece of the rainbow. Rei used to think the rainbow was just a belt of colors in the sky, so he doesn't understand how Merc Red could possess it. The old man says the most known explanation of the rainbow is that it's a 7-colored belt that appears in the sky. But he discovered more in his research. There was a time when he came into possession of the red gems that the Merc Red members carry, unlike a regular charged stone. They were of incredible quality. The old man kept wondering how they could keep supplying such an item to their members. Then he remembered a story that said the rainbow was originally a gem that radiated infinite light and mana. A long time ago, it said that the skies were a bright blue, and the land was abundant, and at the center of the first human city ever founded, there was a jewel that held a massive amount of life force, shining with a rainbow light. The light this rainbow emitted made the lands fertile and healed the sick. However, many powers desired to monopolize the rainbow, and a war broke out between them. At the end of a long war, the rainbow was broken into 7 fragments and scattered across the world. Ray asks if that means Merc Red has one of those 7 fragments of the rainbow. The old man says that those red jewels their members carry are small fragments of the rainbow. During his research, he found several people who believed the same, but considering how dangerous the organization was, he stopped investigating. With that, Ray is certain that the guy in the basement was a Red Merc member, though he doesn't know if the man is an executive or not. Therefore, he concludes that he'll have to investigate Red Merc thoroughly from now on, because he believes that way he'll learn more about the rainbow. The old man realizes that Ray is about to dive headfirst into something very dangerous, but he doesn't think trying to stop him will have any effect. Ray confirms it and says he respects the old man. After returning the ring, the old man says that's all he knows about Red Mercs, and asks if Ray wants to clear up any more doubts. Ray asks if the strengthening and exploration spells cast on the ring can be undone. Right after that, Veronica enters the room. Her grandfather says that since he has a new student today, he'll have to start explaining from the basics. First, all magic begins with the formation of a circle, although you can cast magic using atmospheric mana or mana from a charged stone. As you know, due to the danger of mana addiction, circles become a necessity. When atmospheric mana is channeled through a circle, it goes through a refinement. At that moment, there will be differences in the circle's elements. Depending on individual characteristics, therefore, there's a restriction on the spells available to each person. Thinking it over, Ray concludes that the rings of all the mages he has met so far were filled with different colors of mana. The old man says the method for forming a circle is simple, and asks Veronica to try explaining it. The girl says that first you must gather mana in your hands. If possible, use a type of mana you're familiar with. Then send that mana through your arms and into your heart. After that, you must circulate the mana through your heart and continue increasing the speed without stopping. She performs the process as a demonstration, but ends up using more mana than usual and fails to complete the procedure. She says that if Ray does it like that, he won't be able to make a circle because you have to keep control of the mana until the very end. Her grandfather tells her not to be so disappointed in herself, saying she's still showing definite improvements every day. She really wanted to complete the circle, but is sad for not succeeding this time. Either way, the old man asks if Ray would like to try. The protagonist says yes, and soon after he begins the procedure. By concentrating hard, he enters a kind of mana realm. He knows that first, he must channel mana, no matter the color, as long as he's familiar with it. With that, he focuses and circulates the mana in his heart. For a first time, he's doing pretty well. So well that even the others are surprised. Veronica is left speechless at how things are going. Even her grandfather is impressed. For his part, Ray feels like his body might explode, but he wants to go through with it, no matter what happens, because he believes his effort won't be in vain, until a certain moment comes, when Ray feels as if the mana he was controlling had suddenly vanished. And he's not entirely wrong. The mana didn't vanish out of nowhere. It simply concentrated in one single spot, precisely around his heart, creating a kind of mana circle, just as Veronica described. Such a feat is so impressive that even the protagonist himself is shocked. Ray's mana presence leaves everyone truly surprised. He himself can't believe he got so good in such a short time. His success rate is incredible. Veronica is the happiest of all. She feels overwhelming joy witnessing Ray successfully form the mana circle, and even calls him a genius for it. For his part, the old man thinks that he himself used to be called a prodigy for taking 3 months to create his first circle, but Ray did it on his first try. He's far beyond a genius. He says that the main components of his circle are strengthening, weakening, and regeneration. However, there are other elements beyond those. Although the proportion is very small, you could say that all types of mana exist within Ray. Red is rage, pink is sadness, white is worry, among various others out there. Ray asks if the old man can see the mana through the circle he just created. He replies that he can see it but not feel it, and says that if Ray wants to keep it hidden from others, he can simply stop the mana circulation in his body, and claims that it would be better to hide the mana circle in daily life, because there's no need to go around announcing to this cruel world that you're a mage. He says Ray should reveal his circle only when casting magic using his own mana, but whether someone else will detect it depends on the distance between them. The old man notices that Ray just created his circle but doesn't seem tired at all, so he suggests that he take a test. The old man says he's going to use a little magic, and Ray can try to follow along. He creates a solid object made of mana, and asks if Ray thinks he can do the same. Veronica thinks that magic like that is a complex spell using mana beyond the 7 types, not to mention that to conjure an object like her grandfather did, you need to figure out the exact proportion of the constituent elements, and you also have to calculate the formula, even though she didn't believe it was possible to do something like that. To her and her grandfather's surprise, Ray managed to conjure not just one, but several different objects. The old man thinks what the protagonist did earlier was very impressive, but this latest feat exceeds all expectations. Sometime later, the old man goes back to sleep, and the kids let him rest. Outside, Veronica praises the protagonist's feats and asks how he did that. Ray thinks he can't reveal everything to her, so he just says he tried, and it worked. The girl realizes he's hiding something, but still, she's amazed by his abilities, because he believes that most likely Ray is the most talented magic apprentice to ever come through there. Before the girl goes downstairs, Ray wants to ask her something. He asks if Veronica feels jealous of him. She says maybe, but becomes completely flustered, as she didn't expect Ray to ask something so directly. The protagonist asks if she hates him or feels anger toward him, or if maybe she thinks she should have his abilities and be the right person for such a feat, since that's how people around him have behaved until now. Veronica asks if Ray thinks she's jealous of him. Ray says yes, so she thinks carefully about the question. Then she says that in a way, she would like to do what he does, but she doesn't feel jealous of him. Maybe that's because she sees him as a friend. Ray asks if friends don't feel envy toward one another. She says no, though sometimes it might happen with other people. Veronica wants to hear from Ray that she is his friend because she doesn't want to be the only one to say it out loud. Meanwhile, Ray remembers Pale and the moments when they shared food. After that, he says he understands what the girl meant. She sees that Ray isn't showing any expression, but she thinks he looks sad. Either way, she says Ray is definitely a strange boy. Ray thinks she's not wrong. Before she heads off somewhere else, the protagonist asks if Veronica can teach him how to read. She thinks about it for a moment, since she's never received a request like that before. Besides, she's not used to helping kids with homework, but she decides she'll help him. After all, Ray is her savior, and she feels like she owes him. But she says there's something he has to do before they can start studying together. Ray thinks that, as expected, nothing comes for free, so he'll have to do something in exchange for the help. And he thinks that if it comes to it, he'll wipe out Jeffer's entire gang, if that's what she asks for. However, Veronica says that Ray needs to take a bath. Then she says there's a bathroom on the second floor, and she also prepared some clean clothes for him to wear. After a while, Ray finally takes his bath, and when he comes out, he asks where he should leave his towel. Seeing him like that, Veronica gets flustered because she finds Ray very handsome. He doesn't understand why he's being stared at so much and asks why she's looking at him like that. Veronica insists it's nothing and tells Ray to hurry and get dressed. After he gets dressed, the girl asks why the protagonist wants to learn how to read. He answers that he wants to read some books, because in order to continue his journey upriver, he needs to acquire more knowledge. Previously, Niles taught him to read at a very basic level, but it wasn't proper instruction, which is why Ray wants to learn more. Veronica understands his reasons and says she'll teach him. After all, she won't be reopening the shop anytime soon, but Ray says it's okay if she wants to reopen the shop, because he guarantees that those jerks won't be causing any more trouble. Now that she thinks about it, it's been a while since Veronica was bothered by those boys, and now she realizes Ray had something to do with that. With that, she says she's a little scared of him. But she says she'll reopen the store after class ends. She shows Ray some books used for learning language, saying he can start with those. The protagonist asks how long he'll need to study. Veronica says it took her about a month. Ray then says he'll do his best and will start right now. Sometime later, Veronica presents a board with various reading-related information and explains it to him in a didactic way. She says that if it's too difficult, she can explain it again, but Ray says he's following along, so she decides to give him a test to solve. Ray takes the paper with the questions and actually answers quickly. As soon as he finishes, Veronica says it only took him about a minute. But when she looks at the answers, she sees that all of them are correct. Realizing that Ray doesn't just have talent for magic, Veronica says that at this rate, he'll learn much faster than she did. For now, she says that's all the material she prepared for today. But before Ray goes off to do something else, she wants to ask him for a favor. She asks him to teach her how to better control her mana circle. The protagonist says he doesn't know how to help. After all, unlike her, he's not good at teaching. But the girl insists and says he can think of something while doing it, and it would be great if he could share that with her as well. Ray thinks that this is a good way to repay what Veronica is doing for him, so he agrees to help. The girl is overjoyed that he agreed. Next, she organizes the books that had been used, but she ends up noticing that the other books are quite disorganized, since it's been a while since she last tidied up the shop. Ray asks to read some books from the shelf, and the girl says that if he can manage, there's no problem. She also tells him he can start by looking for a dictionary. She explains that a dictionary is a book that contains information about words, which can help him if he has any doubts. The protagonist asks if this so-called dictionary contains the definition of the word rainbow. Veronica says she doesn't know because she's never looked it up, but words related to magic are usually not listed in dictionaries. Either way, the protagonist continues his search. He uses his magic to grab the books on the higher shelves, handling them with great care. Meanwhile, Ray thinks that originally, he would have had trouble lifting even a single book. But now it's much easier since he's using the mana from the ring, and when he returns to his car, he'll have to test other types of magic as well. Before, the mana contained in the ring, from most to least, was red, light pink, and white. Since the light pink mana is rigid, just like the white one, Ray had trouble using it. Now the mana contained in the ring is not rigid at all. If he keeps experimenting, he might even discover new types of magic. However, for some reason, he doesn't want to do that. Although the boy didn't realize at the time, the reason for that was because the emotion associated with the light pink mana is sadness. Ray never wants to feel that way again. It was an unconscious instinct of self-protection. He felt a strong aversion to anything related to sadness. When he looks up the dictionary, just as Veronica said, rainbow is not listed. However, something written catches his attention. He sees something and runs off, only saying he'll be back soon. Veronica is startled to see him suddenly run off like that. Either way, Ray is going after something, because he believes he's finally understood that man's true goal. Ray found the word offering in the dictionary, and read that this word refers to an animal or person that is sacrificed during a ritual. Immediately, he associated it with the man in the basement, because the note that Ray found earlier mentioned something like that. Considering the exploratory magic embedded in the ring, it's likely connected to the strengthening of the red gem. Moreover, considering that the group was approaching a total of 66 men, the man was probably waiting for Kedrick to file a report. With that, Ray goes to the restaurant where he first spotted Walter. Ray says he only ordered a drink, yet was served a large amount of food. However, the waiter says it's a courtesy for him. He also says the mysterious man is 3 hours late, and adds that the last time he saw him pass by, the man was smiling and also murmuring something about how the time was near. Ray got tired of waiting at the restaurant, so he decided to go into the basement once more to investigate. But before going down there, he sees some boys approaching and becomes a bit suspicious. The boys head to an alley. Ray follows shortly after and asks for a moment of their attention. Annoyed, one of the boys asks who's bothering him, but they immediately recognize Ray and take a step back. After all, the famous hunter approached them and looks irritated. The boys ask very politely what the protagonist wants. Ray remembers that Philip suggested he offer a proper reward when asking someone for help, so he says that if the mysterious man shows up, they should notify him immediately, and he promises to reward them for it. The boys ask what the reward would be. Ray then points to the restaurant next door. After agreeing, the boys say they'll carry out the task, so Ray heads to the basement. But when he looks at the door lock, he realizes the padlock has been replaced. He tries to open it with magic again, but the result is different, because the padlock reacts negatively to his magic. The protagonist realizes that a layer of magical protection has been placed on the lock, so he considers breaking the door open, but that might reveal his visit. In the middle of that, one of the boys shows up and says the suspicious man is approaching. Therefore, Ray has to pull back, but he thinks back to their last encounter. Everything was dark, and the man probably didn't see his face, leading him to believe he might not be recognized. Walter sees a boy near the entrance to his house. The protagonist pretends not to know him at all, so the man simply goes on his way. Ray then thinks that his plan worked, and that this, in a way, was useful to him. The next day, he goes to Kedrick, because he wanted his help with something. Ray had arranged a meeting between the boy and his former master, but he also wants to know more information about the suspect. Then, Walter appears right in front of him, and walks toward Kedrick. The boy greets him formally. Walter says there's no need for such formality. Kedrick says he wishes to report on the number of his followers. But before that, Walter asks who the person accompanying him is. Kedrick says that this is his vice leader and thought it best to introduce him to his teacher. The man tells the protagonist to raise his head and asks what his name is. Ray doesn't say his real name, so he decides to introduce himself with a fake name, claiming his name is Niles. As soon as the protagonist introduces himself, the man tells him to work hard. Right away, Ray wonders if the man doesn't remember seeing him the day before. Regardless, the man asks how many members Kedrick has. He says he has 63, just 3 short of the target number. And then, they'll be able to grow stronger. Walter starts laughing and says the boy is right. He then says that once Kedrick reaches the correct number, he will integrate them into his organization. He also says Kedrick was lucky, because the organization he serves was already looking for a standout unit to train. Kedrick thanks him and says he feels blessed to have been chosen. For his part, Ray knows that's a lie, because there's no way a man wearing such poor quality clothes is an executive of any organization. Next, he asks for permission to ask a question, and it's granted. The protagonist says that if the man has a headquarters, he probably has several branches, so he wants to know which sector the headquarters is in. Walter says that Merg Red has no branches. The organization's members simply travel to different places to carry out their assignments. That part the protagonist believes because he sees the truth in Walter's mana. The man says the headquarters is in Sector 43, and all operations are planned there. But the protagonist knows that's a lie, as he can see his mana trembling. Ray decides to ask one more question. He asks what the leader of the organization is like. The man becomes uneasy with the question, because the mere mention of the leader makes him nervous. He keeps repeating the question. Just thinking about the leader fills him with a mix of emotions. After that, the man says the boss is an incredible person, and even begins to cry while praising him. Ray analyzes the man's internal mana. and realizes that he doesn't feel admiration as he claims. In fact, what he truly feels is overwhelming fear. Walter asks when Kedrick will move into the place. He answers in 2 days, so his boss tells him he needs to take a good look at all the children in his organization. The protagonist watches everything attentively. Ray can see that the enemy is using his magical powers to draw something on the floor, and all of it with his own mana. Walter is using the abandoned factory to cast some kind of magic circle. A short time later, he completes the circle. Then he pulls something from his pocket. Some red stones, just like the ones that were in his house. Kedrick asks what those are. Walter smiles when he hears the question, and answers that it's something very special. He begins using his magic on the stones. Kedrick starts to feel that things are beginning to get dangerous. But the protagonist assures him that everything is fine. The enemy's stones move in different directions. Each one has its own place in the circle, and in the center of it, Walter continues the ritual process. The stones are serving as catalysts. He tells the boys there's no need to be afraid, and warns that these stones are just like the ring he gave to Kedrick. They have healing properties and grant vitality. He also tells Kedrick to be careful with the stone, and not to mess with it. He should treat the ring he received as if it were his own life, and be careful not to lose it. Kedrick promises to keep all of that in mind. With that, Walter leaves and says he'll return in 3 days. Right afterward, the tension in the area fades. Kedrick collapses to the ground from how tense he was. Now he asks what Walter is planning. Ray says that's what he's going to find out. But for now, he needs Kedrick to return to the hotel because he still has work to do. Once alone in the abandoned factory, the protagonist tries to understand what this circle is. He knows it's related to magic, but he doesn't yet understand the details. Either way, he knows someone who might have an idea of what it is. Ray goes to the bookstore. He drew the magic circle in a notebook and showed it to Veronica's grandfather. The old man asks if this drawing is related to the mysterious man who calls himself an executive of Red Merc. Ray thinks he hasn't said anything yet and is impressed that the old man figured it out, so he says that's exactly it. Then the old man says Ray is getting involved in something dangerous, because that drawing represents a magic circle. The old man explains that this power-enhancing technique involves performing a ritual within a circle. Circle magic is quite difficult to perform, so not just anyone can handle it. However, what impresses the old man is that the drawing describes a perfect magic circle. More important than that is the protagonist himself, because he managed to replicate a high-level magic circle perfectly by drawing it in his notebook, even though he's had no formal education. Magic circles condense a large amount of mana into a small space, so tracing the mana within a magic circle back to its source and redrawing it is like separating incredibly thin threads using only touch and distinguishing each one of them. No matter how talented a mage may be at sensing magical energy, this is a feat that would be impossible without any prior knowledge of the magic circle in question. This is just too perfect a form. It's almost as if he can see the magic circle directly with his eyes. Ray asks what the function of this magic circle is. The old man replies that it's a magic exploration spell. He also says that this is the same magic as the one in the ring he showed earlier. As far as Ray understood, the old man claimed that the same spell is being constructed to be stronger and have a wider range. He confirms this and says that it's likely that when the magic is activated, the person inside the circle will be used as a source of energy to catalyze a powerful spell and benefit the mage behind it. In other words, those who are sacrificed will be converted into strength and a boost of magic for the spellcaster. Ray pauses and thinks about this. He remembers what he read in the dictionary, and also what was written on the paper he found at the mage's house. With all the pieces of the puzzle gathered, he concludes that Kedrick and his gang will be the mage's targets. However, there's one detail he still doesn't know. The old man explains that a human is not capable of using such concentrated mana. This power is created from life force and is incredibly toxic. If used carelessly, it can result in mana poisoning. It is possible to refine it using a ring. That's why it's often used as fuel for a creature or to strengthen a magical tool. A charged stone can't be enhanced because charged stones have their limits, so there's no point in strengthening them. But if it's the ring that Ray revealed earlier, things would be different. Seeing the protagonist so deep in thought, the old man asks what he's planning. At first, Ray doesn't reveal his plans. He prefers to remain silent. 3 days later, he goes once again to the abandoned factory and waits for the mage to show up. Some time later, Walter also arrives at the place. He asks why Kedrick's second-in-command is alone. The protagonist says Kedrick is inside, and he's just outside to welcome the master. Walter likes hearing that and praises the boy for a job well done. He also says they did a good job, gathering all the necessary people for the task. After that, Walter opens the door and enters the abandoned factory, but he doesn't see anyone inside and is startled by this, because that wasn't the plan. However, before he can do anything, the protagonist tries to attack him by surprise. Walter manages to defend himself, yet even so, it doesn't lessen his surprise. He asks the boy what he thinks he's doing. Ray doesn't want any small talk. He uses his magical powers against the enemy, throwing him into the warehouse. Walter says he won't forget this. Right after that, the door of the place closes. Frightened, he asks the boy who he is. Ray calls Walter by name and says he's there under orders from the boss to eliminate him, With that, the man deduces that this is the same assassin who once invaded his house. Walter is sure that his opponent has already uncovered the magic circle drawn on the floor, and also that the spell will be activated precisely at 3 o'clock. It's 15.5 minutes to go now, which is truly a blessing for him, because he claims that instead of some useless brats, he'll use the opponent sent after him as the sacrifice. Right after that, he goes on the attack. Ray remains steady as always, because things are going according to plan. From afar, Philip observes something through binoculars. Kedrick tells him to say what he sees, but Philip can't see anything from there. He says there's no way the hunter will lose. But before he can continue, Philip interrupts him because Veronica is with them. The boy says she's also a mage, and Ray brought her there, but there are some things she can't find out about. They try to start a conversation with her, and both end up introducing themselves. Philip asks if Veronica is worried about Ray, but to his surprise, she says no. She claims that Ray is the most talented mage she's ever seen, not to mention that he's incredible even without using magic. That's why she has no concern about him, but rather about whoever his opponent is, since she believes Ray's victory is guaranteed. Philip notices that the girl isn't entirely confident in her words, because she's hiding her trembling hands. Either way, he decides to play along and says he also believes in Ray's victory. Speaking of which, the protagonist has just had his knife broken. His enemy proves to be stronger than he expected. Next, Walter tries to finish off Ray, but quite cleverly, Ray manages to dodge the attack, and then he reconstructs his knife, using the technique he learned from the old man. He also manages to disarm his opponent. Walter is quite impressed by this, as he can't understand the nature of the boy's powers. Ray wastes no time and decides to counterattack. But again, the enemy manages to evade, and his knife is destroyed once more. The protagonist thinks that his attacks won't be very effective against a second circle opponent, concluding that using a magic circle to finish him off would be the best move. After that, Walter asks if he's buying time to activate a magic circle. He says that his opponent isn't the only one thinking about that. With that, he believes he has foiled his opponent's plans, claiming he would never let him defeat him. When attacked by a fire serpent, the protagonist tries to back away, but the enemy says there's no escaping because the serpent only stops once it devours its prey. Even so, Ray runs the best he can and uses his speed to dodge the enemy, but he knows he can't dodge forever. Therefore, he needs to find a way to end this. He knows the enemy's movements are limited because he has to control his flames. With that in mind, Ray decides to try something different. He then tries to trick the serpent into missing him and hitting the enemy instead. Seeing this, Walter asks if he really thought such a petty trick would work. Ray knows exactly who he's up against, a second circle magic opponent. For that very reason, he asked Veronica for help before the fight. The protagonist conjures a magic circle to deflect the enemy. With that, he fights fire with water, because that's what the girl taught him to do. The fire serpent can't stay upright with so much water. Walter is shocked to witness such power, because he didn't believe he was facing such a strong opponent. For his part, Ray wants to finish this quickly, so he uses his water against the enemy, putting an end to his flames for good. After that, the fight between them ends. Walter is left soaking wet from the involuntary bath. Ray, in turn, looks at his watch, realizing there are only 3 minutes left until the scheduled time. But Walter stands up and says he has to go, because he needs to return to the boss. The protagonist tries to stop him from leaving. He says that if Walter walks through that door, he'll destroy the ring he gave to Kedrick. But Walter says nothing matters anymore, because what executives receive is different from the regular supply. Ray thinks he needs to buy time, and he can't let him leave yet. So he asks if Walter thinks the blood-red stones given to executives can't be destroyed. Blood stones can crack when a specific combination of elements is inserted into them. Their outer surface becomes incredibly fragile. The information he leaks includes clever lies. They can then be destroyed. Irritated by the provocation, Walter says he's going to finish off the protagonist, but Ray says he's welcome to try. Then Ray throws the ring, sending it far away from the door. Desperate, Walter runs after the magical item, because he doesn't want to let such a precious object get away. He gets very close to grabbing the ring, but before he can reach it, the item slips from his hands. Ray, from a distance, had thrown a rock that hit the object, delaying the enemy even further. Walter becomes extremely irritated by this. Even so, Ray walks out the door and leaves him inside. The enemy runs toward the door, because he wants to go after the protagonist. However, the spell backfires, and he ends up falling into his own trap. Walter doesn't understand how that happened, as he believed he still had a few minutes before the circle was activated. But all of this was part of the protagonist's plan. Previously, Veronica had warned him that 5 minutes was the maximum limit and told him to accelerate the activation time of the magic circle. So that's exactly what the protagonist did. He changed the activation time of the circle, triggering it earlier than Walter expected. Sometime later, Ray decides to go inside to check the situation. Inside the circle, he finds only the enemy's clothes and ring. Upon picking up the fallen ring, Ray realizes that the magical power of the item is much more intense than before. Back with the kids, they're worried because it's been a while since Ray has shown any sign of life. However, Veronica senses a different mana approaching and says it feels like a berserk. It's that intense. Kedrick asks what that means. Philip says they can find out later, They follow Veronica, but everyone is shocked to see who is arriving. Rei appears, covered in flames. Veronica says that this must be mana poisoning, which can be very dangerous. Kedrick decides to act in the midst of this. He says that if it really is dangerous, they need to protect themselves. Right after, he tries to attack Rei, but with just one strike from the protagonist, he's thrown far away. Seeing his friend in trouble, Philip tries to reason with Rei and attempts to bring him back to his senses, but it doesn't work because Rei is about to shoot fire at them. The kids are only saved because Veronica uses her powers to conjure a magical shield. After that, she says there are only two ways to stop Rei. They either need to force Rei to put out the flames himself or put them out on their own. Philip says he'll call a water truck and asks her to hold on for 5 minutes. Meanwhile, Rei charges a huge fireball and launches it at them. The kids are desperate from the attack, but once again, Veronica protects them. However, she knows she won't be able to hold on much longer. Still, she's okay with that, because she thinks that if it's for Rei's sake, she's willing to sacrifice herself. A flashback reveals what happened in the warehouse. As soon as Rei picked up the ring, he realized the extraordinary amount of mana inside the item. He knew the risks involved in trying to use a ring like that. But Rei saw something that caught his attention. Amid the flames, there was a crying boy, saying he didn't want to be burned. And in the middle of the chaos, he begged for help. The protagonist realized that these were Walter's memories from when he was a child and ended up being consumed by the flames. That didn't kill him, but made him stronger. Once he was reborn, the boy longed for revenge. Walter's memories begin to blend with Rei's. Everything the protagonist has been through surfaces at this moment, and he remembers his original goal, which was also about revenge. Like a demon, the flames started whispering in his ear, trying to convince him to join it. Back to the present, consumed by the power of the flame, the protagonist attacks his friends without even realizing it. Because he's not in his right mind, Veronica, on her part, is about to perish, until she stops defending herself and surrenders to fate. In that instant, even in his confusion, the protagonist sees something. The girl begins to emit white mana. Rei looks at it and finds it beautiful. He even tries to reach for the mana. After that, he regains consciousness and stands before Veronica once more. 3 days pass, and they're at Philip's hotel. Veronica was taken to the infirmary and is being cared for by Rei. She asks for water, and the protagonist brings it. Veronica was bedridden for 2 days due to the use of atmospheric mana. That happened because of the help she gave to Rei, so he felt guilty and ended up being the one to take care of her. The girl takes advantage of the protagonist's goodwill and asks him for various favors. Too shy to refuse, Rei agrees to everything. Some time later, they sit down to talk, and Veronica says that Rei was suffering from mana poisoning. Rei says that only happened because he was wearing Walter's ring. Veronica remembers the warnings her grandfather gave about that, and asks if Rei intends to use it. He replies that he doesn't because he knows how harmful it is, and besides, he never wants to see someone in danger because of him again. The girl is impressed by his attitude. Rei says there's one more thing he wants to point out. He thanks her once again for her help, which leaves Veronica a bit flustered. She says that Rei was poisoned and doesn't know what he's talking about. Before they can continue, someone interrupts the conversation. Philip shows up and asks if it's a bad time. They go somewhere else to talk in private. Philip hands over the belongings of the man Rei asked about. He had sent some boys to break into the basement and grab everything they could find. The protagonist takes a photo of Walter as a child in an orphanage. It's hard to see the faces as they're all blurred. Philip says they also found a notebook of the man's and believes it contains important information. Rei flips through it and notices it contains some orders from Red Merc to Walter, which were actually carried out. One page of the notebook catches his attention. There was an order to investigate some gems of different colors, and in different places as well, but both investigations failed. Rei realizes they have a theory that the rainbow was split into 7 fragments, and these orders are to find gems associated with specific colors. He wonders why Red Merc is looking for rainbow fragments, although they could be referring to completely unrelated colored gems. That alone is enough reason to investigate further. Seeing Rei deep in thought, Philip assumes he got attached to someone and asks if he's still planning to leave the sector soon, as he previously said. Either way, he hands over the payment for everything Rei has done so far, and even added a bit more for helping him reconcile with Kedrick. Philip says that as long as Rei is in the sector, he'll make sure his payments are delivered daily by the delivery department, and the agreement can be adjusted whenever Rei wants. The boy just asks Rei to let him know when he's decided the date of his departure, so he can say goodbye properly, since once Rei leaves, he'll probably never see him again. In return, the protagonist reaches out his hand to Philip, and says that when he leaves, Philip can come with him if he wants. The boy is stunned by the invitation, and panics upon hearing that from Rei.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.